Please welcome to the stage Atlantic Live President Margaret Lowe.
Hello, hello. Wow. Good afternoon. As our voice of God, as we like to call it, said, I'm Margaret Lowe. I am president of Atlantic Live. That's the events division of the Atlantic magazine. And we spend our days crisscrossing the country, bringing people together to talk about some of the weightiest issues of our time. And we are so happy to be here with you in Oklahoma City and to welcome you to the first in a series of events called Defining Justice. We are exploring the experiences of women and children touched by the criminal justice system. And I must say, it is extraordinary to look out at this crowd and to see how many of you came here for this conversation today. It's clear that this issue resonates in a profound way in Oklahoma, and it is hard to resist saying, Oklahoma, okay. Thank you so much for being here. Women are the fastest growing prison population in the United States, and Oklahoma sends women to prison at the highest rate in the country, at about 2.5 times the national average, and that rate is climbing. We're here to consider why this is happening and to think about the way forward for the state, its criminal justice system, and the women and families caught up in that system. Before we get going, it is very important to me to thank Google for making today's event possible and the whole Defining Justice series. We're also so grateful to our collaborators at Reveal from the Center for Investigative Reporting. That's a national nonprofit news organization that produces, among many other things, a weekly radio show and a podcast. And today you're going to hear from two of Reveal's reporters about a story they just published this morning, examining the issues that we're here to talk about today. A few much more practical notes before we get started. Please silence your cell phones, but please don't put them away because we'd love you to join the conversation on Twitter. We are at Atlantic Live, and the hashtag is Defining Justice. And we want you to join in the conversation in the room too, so we're going to have time throughout the afternoon for your questions. So with that, let's get rolling. We will begin with one woman's story. Please welcome Patricia Spotted Crow, a mother and former inmate at the Oklahoma Department of Corrections. And here is Public Radio International's Allison Herrera. Allison is one of the reporters on that Reveal story we talked about earlier, and she is here to lead the conversation. Please take it away.
Hi, Patricia. How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
Good, good. So in 2010, Patricia Spotted Crow was sentenced to 12 years in prison for possession of $31 worth of marijuana. This was your first felony. Your sentence sparked national outrage and led to a grassroots movement that led to your early release. Since then, you've reunited with your children and you're adjusting to life outside of prison. And while it's unusual for somebody to be released early, your sentence that you received is not unusual, according to the reporting that we've done in our story. You were 25 when you went to prison, and you had 4 small children. Can you tell me, when you were, after you were, got caught and you were being sentenced, tell me about that interaction that you had with the judge and how that made a really big difference in the sentence that you got, because you felt like you were treated a little bit differently. And the judge is obviously a really important player when it comes to sentencing crimes.
So the judge asked me questions, I guess like for intake. Of course, I don't know anything because I've never been in trouble before, ever criminally in my life, okay? This is the very first time. And so they were asking me questions like about my childhood, and I responded, I had 2 parents because that was one of their questions. I did have 2 parents. They asked like, did we live in poverty or whatever? And no, like my mom worked and like we had stuff. She was always busy working. She worked really hard. Well, they said that played a part in my sentencing because they expected me to, like those people who come from like only one parent or from foster homes, or they just wanted me to say like I had a horrible childhood, but because I didn't, she said that she didn't feel like I had, like, there was no reason for me to do this. So that's why she said she gave me a harsh sentence.
Mm-hmm. So you felt like they were projecting projecting of like who you were, and that played a big part in your sentence.
Yes.
And I understand your mom also was sentenced along with you. Can you talk a little bit about that?
So if I'm correct, my mom was 55 at the time, and my mother's never even had a speeding ticket before, okay? She's never been in trouble. She was not even involved in this. The night that it happened, she was the only one home. And so they have my mom asking my son, like, can you give Nana that $10 bill and I'll give you this $20 bill? So they're saying like my mom involved my son in drug deals, but they made it seem like he did it himself and just brought it to her. Like he didn't know what was going on, but they went really hard on my mom for that. And they winded up ultimately giving her a 30-year suspended sentence with 5 years of UAs and hair follicles.
Mm-hmm. And so now you're back living with your mom, correct? And you have 6 kids right
Yes.
now. That's amazing. And you said that you always wanted a big family when you were
I've
young.
always said I wanted 10 kids, so it's funny because when I be like, I'm pregnant, Mom, she's like, really? Well, other people be like, oh my God, stop. So, but my kids were crying when I told them I got my tubes tied, because going to prison, like taking a break, I feel like my body is so much older, I can't do it. So when I told my son, he was like, why did you do that? And I was like, oh.
So let's talk about the representation that you had for your case and the lawyer. You took what was known as a blind plea. Can you talk about the sentencing and what you expected, what you thought that meant, and then what actually happened?
Okay, so I did have a paid attorney, and
I'm sorry, can you repeat what you said?
I had a paid attorney. His name was Mark Claiborne, and he represented me and my mother. Now, we went through the whole trial before we found out that you're not even supposed to represent 2 co-defendants. But he did represent that, so I counted on him in the end. But he,
he represented you and your mom, and then when it came time for sentencing, you
okay,
were
yeah.
saying, yeah.
Okay, so when it came time, so my mom got sentenced a month before I did, but they had came before that with 2 years in and 2 years out for me and my mom. So I told my attorney no, because they said if you had a paid attorney, he works for you. So I need my mom to go home. And so that's what he went for. So he came back and they sentenced my mom. They said that they would make sure that she went. I have to do a blind plea. But he told me that a blind plea meant, the judge said she would not give me more than 2 years if I had to do every day of 2 years, but she might give me 15, 20 years probation. Well, that sounded good to me. So when I went up there and did the blind plea, that's not what happened.
What did happen?
Well, really, when I went up there, he said 15 years. She said 15 years. The DA said 15 years, and the judge automatically right then said, no, I won't do 15, but I'll do a 12. So she tells me to go in the little box, and I'm still like, what do you mean 12? 12 what? I don't know what's going on. And then Mark Claiborne comes over, and he's like, oh, you'll do 4.5 years on a 12, and it was just a blur from there for a while.
You felt like you didn't know what was really going on in terms of like what your lawyer was doing for you, because like you said, he was working for you.
Right.
So can you also explain a little bit about that too?
So I do kind of feel like there should be like advocates or some people that help people who are first time in trouble, because like I really had no idea, like the bond, and me and my mom sat in jail for 23 days together when this originally first happened. I really didn't know any of my rights and stuff, and it's crazy that it takes you going to prison to actually like try to learn some of that, because you really should know some out here. I just feel like if I would have had better advice, or maybe if I had a whole bunch of friends that were criminals, they could have told me back then what to do, instead of now. So.
So your case got a lot of attention, and you had reporters coming in to talk to you at Mabel Bassett. You had a television crew. How did that change how you were treated up in Mabel Bassett? And then you all, at the same time, you were really dealing with missing your children, and that really, I think you said to me, that really helped you do your time. But you also connected with women that didn't know where their children were. So I'm sorry, I asked like 3 questions here, but the first one was, your case got a lot of attention, and how did that
Okay,
change?
so it worked in my favor for some, and it worked against me. It was the 50-50 between the inmates and the guards. So some of the guards were crappy, some of the inmates were crappy, and then other people were happy, and they like do something with it. And then other people were like, you know, what makes you so special? My story is this and da 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 da. And why are they worried about you? Why don't they come worry about me? And so it was a whole bunch of just all the way around. Everything you can think of is what I got. So.
And so some of the other women, you know, we were talking about your kids the other day and how, you know, some women, they didn't know where their kids were. And you connected with a lot of those women. Can you talk about that?
Okay, so when I first got to prison, I didn't really know what to expect from, like, what was going to be on the yard. I just seen TV, too, so I know they're going to try to beat me up. That's all I know, okay? So when I get to the yard and I'm seeing, like, these are people's grandmas and people's moms and sisters, and, like, just to even think my mom being in that situation, which is just, like, horrible. And then I think about my mom, because every time she came to visit me, she cried. Every time I talked to her on the phone, she cried. I'm just like, stop crying. You're driving me nuts. But I don't know how that felt for her. I don't know if it's worse for the people on the inside or the outside. So, but talking to these girls, there's young girls in there that have babies, and you talk to these girls and you're like, where are your kids at? And they're like, I don't know. Are they together? No. Well, how are you gonna find them? I don't know. You know, and I could not even begin to imagine what that would even be like, because I didn't have to go through that, thank God. But I didn't see my kids very much. When they originally first came the first time, it was really hard because they didn't want to leave. They were crying, and then it was
They
just
wanted their mom.
right. And so it was devastating for me to see my kids like that. So kind of was just like X that out, you know. My mom was real considerate, I guess I want to say. Like, there'd be times where she'd be like, you want to talk to your babies? No, Mom, no. She didn't ask me no questions, and she just went on. And she didn't push me or nothing like that, because there were times where I couldn't talk to my kids at all. So
Yeah. Why was that?
just like feeling guilty from not being there, knowing that I'm missing everything, and then, oh my God, worrying will kill you. Like, you will literally like have a heart attack or a stroke from worrying from anything. Like, you know, what if my mom's blood pressure goes up and my kids don't know, or what if something happens to my kids? And I don't remember what happened, but one time the phones were down for like a week, and I could not talk to my mom. Oh, I was going crazy. I didn't know if she was okay. I don't know. I couldn't call no one, so.
So since you've been out, what has life been like? I mean, how have you adjusted to being on the outside, and also just connecting with your kids after you're away?
Okay, so I don't know if you try to get an apartment, they have steps about felons, 7 years, 2 years. If you have a drug case, you're X'd out. So there's no help there when you need help with housing. As far as jobs go, I'm from a little town, so everybody knows me, you know. Even if they don't know me, they know who I am now. So I've only did nursing. I don't know anything else, and of course, I can't do nursing no more. So getting a job there is like, I can't even go in and act like I feel good about getting this job because they already know who I am. So it's been really hard. As far as reconnecting with my kids, that was real big for me because I miss my kids so much. I guess from putting them out of my mind and just trying to do my time when I came home, like I would literally get like so sick to my stomach because I would look at my kids and I wouldn't get happy, mad, or sad. Like I had been so drained from like emotions, and for the first year I cried the whole year. I got down to like 102 pounds. It got pretty bad, you know. Then I realized like I have to do this. I have to go home to my kids. So when I got back, my mom had told me, don't try to make up for any lost time because you can't. You just have to go from here. So I did leave a little baby behind, like an actual real baby. Like I didn't say bye to no one that morning I left because I had no idea. So she just went from seeing her mom one day to me not coming back. And then when I came back, she was like almost fully grown. I mean, she's walking and talking, but I was scared she wouldn't remember me, but she did. But she's really close to my mom.
How long was it before you got to see your kids after you were released?
Oh, I went straight. Well, I didn't. I went and met with my lawyer first, and then I went straight to my kids. And so they have a video of when my kids are coming on the bus, because they did not know I was leaving. I did not know I was leaving. I just woke up on a Thursday, and I got called down to the office. And when I went in there, the man had a check in his hand. I was like, oh, my God, is that for me? And he was like, yes, you have 15 minutes to get out of here. And I was like, oh, my God, my mom lives in Kingfisher. He's like, nope, you have to go, because the media was all outside, and they were, like, waiting on me for, like, 4 days.
So you didn't know you were going to be released?
No, I did not. And so when the bus pulls up and my kids get off, oh, they were so excited. The little baby, she was already at home, and they got off and they were excited, and they were like, "Are you gonna stay?" And I was like, "Yes, I'm staying."
Yeah.
So
I mean, so just going back to, you know, being a mom and being in prison, I mean, I think that's just probably one of the most difficult things for you.
yeah, I mean, it is pretty difficult. I guess it's just so hard because with my older kids, they understand and I can talk to them and tell them, but the babies, they don't understand, and they're, "Why can't you come home? Why can't I just stay with you?" Or like, "I don't understand." And so I think it's difficult when you have littler kids than it, like with my older kids, they were I'm not gonna say understanding, okay, but they understood what was really going on.
Yeah. Well, I guess we're almost done with our time, but I wanted to know if there was anything else that you wanted to say to everybody. We have a room full of judges and district attorneys and prosecutors and people who work in the field, and as somebody who has been incarcerated and you've had this experience and now you're on the outside, what's something that you think that you'd like people to take away from, or what do you take away from your experience?
So as far as that goes, I think there should definitely be more. There should be more help before they actually just send you to prison for first-time drug offenses. The majority of these girls were in there from taking a drug case for a man. So like it wasn't even their drug. So now they're just in here. So there should definitely be more help as far as that goes. And maybe we should start like younger start down here instead of saying, "Oh, well, this is how your childhood was and this is why this happened. So why not start with more stuff down here?"
Yeah, and one of the reasons why you ended up going to prison was because you were, you were selling marijuana to be able to put food on your table.
Correct. And it's easy for everyone to say like get a job and stuff, but I can get a job, but that's not going to put food and diapers on my baby today, and I have to wait 2 weeks for that, and then where I'm right now, if I wanted to get a job even at Sonic, it wouldn't even be worth it because I'm going to have to give you all of my paycheck just for gas taking me there, and I have 6 kids that I have to support, so that's not even plausible for me, you know what I'm saying? So, and getting a job is really hard. Like I said, I haven't had any luck.
Yeah. Well, I just wanted to thank you so much for coming and telling us some of your story, and then just thank you for sharing that story with me and everything. So thank you.
Well, thank you.
Thank you so much, Allison Herrera. And Patricia, you're staying with us. Thank you. And we're going to have a few more people join you on stage to explore the question that we're asking today, why so many Oklahoma women are behind bars. So please welcome Chris Steele. He's the executive director at the Education.
Great. I heard it. It's great.
Takes a lot of courage
Chris,
to do what you're doing. Thank you.
You clearly have a lot of fans. I didn't even get to finish telling people who you are. So I assume everybody knows who you are, but I'm going to tell them anyway. Chris Steele is the executive director at the Education and Employment Ministry and the former speaker of the Oklahoma House of Representatives. Welcome, Chris. Ziva Brandstetter is a senior editor at Reveal.
Hey there.
She is the other journalist reporting on this issue that we talked about earlier, and Steve Kunzweiler is Tulsa County's DA. Steve. And here to lead the conversation, my colleague, Atlantic contributing editor, Allison Stewart. Take it away, Allison.
Thanks, Margaret. I'm not surprised we have a full house here because I've done a lot of these panels and a lot of issues, and I can tell you that unsolicited over the past week, I've gotten emails, tweets, documents, links to stories from people who care deeply about this issue. And one of the things we're going to talk about a little bit is because this room is full of people who have deep connections to this issue, we're also live streaming. So there are people who are watching this who, for the first time, are discussing this issue or learning about it. So we're going to walk the fine line between deep in the weeds and the big, broad questions. But that said, there is going to be an opportunity for questions at the end of our conversation. So if there was ever a subject where a simple question, a one-word question fits, it's this one. Why? But I want to become very precise. I'm going to ask this to each of you but I want you to answer it through the lens of the way you experience this issue. You as a district attorney, you as a journalist, you as a former legislator and an advocate, and you as someone who's lived through it. So Steve, why do we have this issue in Oklahoma from your perspective as a district attorney?
Well, I have the benefit of being a prosecutor for over 28 years. Started out in a rural jurisdiction, now I'm in Tulsa County urban. I have, based on anecdotal evidence, just kind of perceived what was going on when I first became a prosecutor. Back in the late 80s, we were beset with a new drug, crack cocaine. I often refer to it as kind of having the perfect trifecta of factors. Inexpensive, easy to manufacture, and highly addictive. That was a game changer in most respects for what you're seeing in courts. You follow that up with methamphetamine. At the beginning, it was quite an involved laboratory, but now you can make it in a pop bottle. Once again, highly addictive, easy to manufacture, inexpensive. Throw into that now what we're dealing with, which is opioid epidemic, prescription drug epidemic, and you have this what I would call tsunami of people getting addicted much earlier than we ever dealt with in the past. From that perspective, you would find that prosecutors and judges were observing those problems and were bringing those things to the attention of the legislature. We were urging them to look at what is getting ready to happen, because at some point I knew 20 years ago, you could see this happening unless we had some modification in the laws to address the difference between highly addictive drugs and the need for treatment versus all other crimes. So here we are, right?
Drugs.
We're here because of a lack of action, at least in my opinion, on trying to address it when we saw it coming back in the late 80s and into the 90s.
The drug issue. Chris, for you, as a former legislator and now as an advocate for helping people re-enter their lives, why do you have these numbers in Oklahoma?
If the question is, why do we have the highest female incarceration rate in the nation in Oklahoma, I would say it's because historically our elected officials have tended to be reactive instead of proactive. We've historically based decisions on emotion and fear and anecdotes when it comes to criminal justice matters, rather than on data and on research and on facts. Another big problem in our state is that we have failed to recognize addiction and mental illness as a health issue, and we have instead chosen to punish people who battle addiction and mental illness rather than treat those issues properly with health care. The last factor I would mention is that our elected officials, and this goes for those serving in the legislature and statewide office, our district attorneys, our judges, and so on, have seen political value in being quote-unquote tough on crime instead of being smart on crime.
Yeah, we'll talk about that a little bit later. Patricia, you lived through this. You've seen this firsthand. Why do you think, from your perspective?
I definitely think there should be more, I don't want to say like help from the state for like young mothers and girls, more opportunities at programs to help girls get their diploma, get jobs, get these girls like ready for the real world, instead of, I feel like I was like a left behind kid in the school system. So when I turned 16 and had my son, I got kicked out of school. So I ultimately went to the alternative program. But I think things would be different if we started there with like the girls being younger. Because like I said, a lot of those girls in there were in there for a man, and not once, twice, but 3 times now. And then like me, I have such a harsh sentence, which I think is so unfair, because you can't tell me that I need to be in prison for 12 years for selling marijuana to feed my kids, when you have rapists out here that are raping little kids and taking installment plans in prison. That means getting out, doing the same thing, and coming back. So you can't tell me that.
Eva, I saved you for last because you're the journalist in the room. You're the person who has been diving deep into the data, and your project you've been working on with your colleagues has done something that is hard to imagine that someone hasn't done before. You actually crunch the data. And if we can get one of the first slides up so that we can talk a little bit about, so people can have a visual for the number of women incarcerated in Oklahoma versus the number on a national level. Okay, it's over there. Tell me a little bit about what your data tells us. Who's incarcerated, why they're incarcerated.
Sure. So we spent 18 months on this project, and most of that was spent convincing Department of Corrections that we needed all of the data, not just part of it. And there were deep flaws in the data. They were trying to help us as best they can, but it's a large data set going back 20 years or so, more than 1 million records. And so at the Center for Investigative Reporting, we have a really great data team that just spent a lot of time diving into this. And so, the first thing we started off with was the female incarceration rate. That's a rate per capita. So the most recent figures are 151 of every 100,000 women in Oklahoma are in prison. And that number, we've been number one since 1991. That has never changed. So you can see the way our rate there on top is going up, and the U.S. rate's going sort of not increasing as quickly. The main finding we had was that the most common reason women are locked up are lower level drug charges, so possession of drugs and possession with intent. And for those charges, the sentences are actually increasing in everywhere except Tulsa. So in the last decade, yeah, it's interesting. Something is working in Tulsa. So in the last decade, 9 years or so, the sentences for possession and possession with intent have increased 30% roughly statewide, and in Tulsa they've gone down quite a bit. So we have some slides on that. So when you lock more women up and more women up for longer periods, you're going to have a higher rate. The receptions of women coming into DOC fell by half coming from Tulsa County during the 10 years that we looked at, and it continued to increase everywhere else. So the good news is something is going right in Tulsa County, and that's a model that I think works according to our data.
Absolutely.
Is there a common denominator among these women?
We did find a very uneven system of justice in this state. So you found cities like Tulsa and Oklahoma City that have programs that help women, that provide treatment, some better numbers there, but it tended to be in rural areas, you had longer sentences. Poor women, definitely. Women of color definitely were overrepresented in prison. So Native women especially were locked up at 3 times their rate in the population. Black women twice their rate. And so you have poor women and women of color definitely paying the price.
Okay, I want to get back to that issue in a second, but I do want to bring Steve into the conversation. And I had a fancy question, but I'm going to tell you a story instead. My cab driver on the way over asked me what I was doing. I told him. He said, I got stuck up by druggies at least 3 times a month who don't pay. And I'm trying to feed my family. I'm working 12 hours a day. I want to see them in jail. But then he said by the end of the ride, but we got to do something for them too, because they have a drug problem. How do we balance this, Steve?
Okay, well, I want to respond to something that Chris had said. I mean, when you can say you need to be smart on crime, you also have to look at what the laws are or how they're written. In Oklahoma, like many other jurisdictions, we have kind of what you might think is a 3 strikes you're out. So prosecutors are duty bound to follow the law. You don't get to elect to say, I'm not going to choose to follow the law. You have somebody in front of you who's clearly violating the law, and they are now at that point of committing their 3rd, 4th, or 5th, or whatever it is. You can't pretend that the law says that person should be incarcerated, and yet that was the issue that we were broaching with the legislature back in the 80s and 90s as this is a problem, you need to deal with it. So prosecutors and judges were the ones who were on the forefront of implementing alternative court programs like drug court, DUI court, mental health court. I think one of the things that is lost on the equation is there's always a backstory to the possession charge. Somebody saying they've gone into prison because they had simply possessed something. Prosecutors and law enforcement are often armed with a lot more information. Was that person possessing that drug in the presence of children? Did that prosecutor, in order to work the case out, agree to drop it from a distribution charge to a possession just to get the case moving forward? So sometimes there can be a misidentification of what the true factors were. Was this person involved in gang activity? A lot of different factors that would weigh into it. In addition to that, there are distinctions between working within an urban jurisdiction versus a rural, and I pointed this out to Ziva. When you're in a rural jurisdiction and you're a business owner or you're a neighbor to this person who's continually thieving or committing crimes, at some point, where the prosecutor or the court may be trying to work with this person and get them rehabilitated, but they are not choosing to get rehabilitated. They keep on going and breaking into people's homes or their cars or committing their criminal conduct. In those jurisdictions, everybody knows everybody. And so at some point, the reality of those people in those jurisdictions, those towns, those cities, they're like, hey, prosecutor, or hey, law enforcement, why aren't you doing something about this person who keeps on victimizing me?
That sort of gets to the point that my cab driver was making, that
Right.
he doesn't want to get stuck up. He's got to support his family. But at the same time, he recognizes there's a drug issue. Back to the original question, what can be done?
Okay, so we talk about female incarceration, but I have been railing against the machine for decades now. We see the end product, what the problem is, but if we're truly serious about rehabilitating the system, we need to take the money that we're spending on the back end. I agree with Chris about the reactive part, and we need to throw every dime of that money on the front end. When police are going out to homes and there's domestic violence, there's neglect, there's drug addiction issues, not enough to maybe charge somebody with a crime, not enough to pull children from the home. You can still file a deprived children's action, bring that family into court, and start mandating those parents to start learning that their bad behaviors are only going to create a byproduct of children who are being deprived of the lives they're entitled to. So if we're meaningfully trying to solve the problem, meaningfully, if we are all honest with each other, we should be spending our money where we can make the greatest long-term impact, which is getting involved in the lives of children who deserve the protection. I'm very fortunate to have a program in Tulsa County through the Kaiser program, the Women in Recovery.
Yeah.
One of the most shocking things that I heard at the first graduation that we had, all these women who were graduating and walking across the stage, one of the most shocking things that you would hear these women was they would attribute their drug issues to being a victim of child abuse in their minority. You'll have Mimi Trash up here at some point. I'm confident that she will relate to you the high percentage of that correlation. More to reemphasize what I'm saying, we need to attack the problem where the problem begins, and that's with our children, and help those children.
Yeah. I know that's the place where you and Chris do agree. And Chris, something I'm interested for you, because you've had an interesting career here as a legislator and now as an advocate. You started really making noise about this years ago. So what's changed between, let's say, 5 years ago and here in 2017 that there has been some movement towards addressing the issue?
So the conversation in Oklahoma that's occurring is at a higher level. I think that more people understand the value of addressing issues of addiction and mental illness with treatment rather than punishment. I think more families are affected and impacted by incarceration. And I think that we have reached a point among the people who live in Oklahoma that collectively the voters, the citizens have said, time out. We have to approach this issue differently. I will tell you that spending for corrections in the state of Oklahoma has increased 172% in the last 2 decades. Our state has a balanced budget amendment, which means that the state legislature cannot appropriate more money than it takes in a given fiscal year. What that means is this: the more money we spend on corrections, the less money we have to spend on education or health care or infrastructure or services for kiddos who are in at-risk situations. So the fact that we're having some budgetary challenges, the fact that more people are impacted, negatively impacted by either a felony conviction or incarceration itself, I think has caused a discussion to occur that has really begun to change the way that we look at this issue in Oklahoma, coupled with the fact that community leaders and state leaders and opinion leaders have stepped up and said enough is enough. We ultimately have to chart a different approach, a better approach when it comes to dealing with criminal activity within our state. The last thing I would say is this: the validation of my points probably come in the fact that last year a coalition within our state decided to kind of bypass the political gridlock that has led to the highest incarceration rates in the state and take this issue directly to a vote of the people by reclassifying low-level offenses such as addiction, simple drug possession, simple property crimes from felony convictions, punishable by incarceration, to misdemeanors, punishable by treatment, and then redirect the money, the savings, as Steve was saying, back to local communities to invest in treatment and mental health care. And those initiatives passed, the people of Oklahoma voted in favor of those initiatives by almost 60%. So we're seeing a change. We're seeing a change, and we're experiencing that change primarily in part because of these kind of conversations.
But isn't there a certain sector of the population that thinks that 780 and 781, that maybe voters didn't know what they were voting for?
Of course, yeah. There is a significant disconnect among some of our elected officials and the will of the people on this particular issue. There are individuals, there are organizations, the District Attorney's Council, who oppose and are trying to repeal these state questions. So there is some resistance. We're well aware of that, but we believe, based on not only what the voters have said, but also some of the success that other states who have already implemented these kind of reforms have experienced, that we're going to achieve the same kind of positive outcomes in Oklahoma if we can just give these ideas, these reforms, these initiatives a chance to work.
Stevie, you want to jump in?
Just quickly, one of the things we found in our research were we looked at reforms in other states, especially conservative states that had reformed their sentencing laws, cut sentencing time for drug possession, and about half a dozen states had both reformed their sentencing laws and their crime rates had gone down. So they were spending less on corrections and locking people up, treating more people, and their crime rates had dropped. Georgia was a specific example that really jumped out. But I think the other side of this coin is, and Steve and I were talking about this, is that money really does need to go to treatment. We've had the experience in Oklahoma of reforming, let's say, the mental health system, and those people are all supposed to get treatment in community settings, and then the money sometimes doesn't make it there. So I think a good question to ask is, how are they going to capture that money, make sure it actually goes to treatment?
Steve, that was one of your concerns, right?
It's really good.
That was one of your concerns, where the savings are going.
Sure, and I'm going to
Or maybe going.
I'm going to respond a little bit to what Chris is saying.
I know.
You know, many people in this state, when Proposition 780 passed, their perception was we were decriminalizing or making marijuana a perpetual misdemeanor if you possessed it. Very few people, in my experience, actually realized that law actually made drugs like crack cocaine, PCP, heroin, methamphetamine, all perpetual misdemeanors. The net effect of that is, and I brought this to the attention of Mr. Steele when this was an issue, was we have now the most liberal drug possession laws in the country. California enacted similar legislation, and they are seeing some of the net effect of that legislation, where their drug court programs are evaporating. And that's one of my biggest concerns, is with all the effort that we put in to try and get people into these drug court programs, when they're only charged with a misdemeanor, those people are not going to avail themselves to the treatment they need, which we know takes time. In Tulsa County, the average time it takes to satisfactorily complete the drug court program is 18 months to 36 months. Once those people graduate, they're moving on to productive lives. When you make the maximum exposure of punishment to 12 months on a misdemeanor, you're eviscerating all the research that says you need a lot more time. So while there may be some pros to the idea that we need to look at some of these drug crimes, the flip side is you can't overreact to the problem. It also affects my ability to prosecute gangsters. You know, Al Capone didn't go to prison for murdering people. He went to prison for tax evasion. Well, when I have a gangbanger who is victimizing people in a community, and I can catch that guy with methamphetamine or crack cocaine, I can put him in prison. Now I can't. So now they are now emboldened to remain in the community.
I know this is an ongoing conversation, but I do want to move on because we do have a lot of other things to talk about. If we could get the slide up that looks at the racial disparities, this is something Ziva brought up earlier. And black women are incarcerated twice the rate to the representation in the state. Native American women 3 times the representation. Patricia, this is a unique opportunity. I'm a black woman talking to a Native American woman. This doesn't happen that often. Real talk, why is this?
My mother is black, actually, and I think that played a big part into her getting sentenced. And when they put up 100 cases.
Oh wait, your mic. You know what? We want to get you a mic because your mic is doing something. It's not working correctly.
Out of Kingfisher County, when they put up 100 cases.
Can you hang on one sec?
It's okay. We want to make sure we hear what you have to say. We'll fix it.
So on the side.
Ah,
There's a
it's
delay.
on.
There you go.
It's on now.
Testing.
Oh yeah, there you go.
Okay, so out of Kingfisher County, Josh Welch.
Why don't you know what? Start at the beginning because we really didn't hear the top of what you said about your mom.
Oh, okay, yes. My mother is black, and so I'm on both sides. I did not know the statistics that you brought up about the Native American women. I did not even know that. But I think that my mother's being black played a part in our case out of Kingfisher County. So my lawyer put up 100 cases, almost similar to ours, okay? The only one that really went to jail was me and my mom out of 100 cases. And he aired this on the news like this is statistics. And then anyone else just got off with like probation and stuff. But they sentenced my mom, who's never even had a driving ticket, who's 55 years old, who will not even probably live another 30 years. And you like, if she messes up and goes to prison now, that's where she'll be out till she dies. All because of something that was really stupid. I'm not saying that we shouldn't have been punished. That's not what I'm saying. You do something, you should definitely be punished. Same thing with my kids. I tell them this all the time, But to be so much, and like I said, I feel like our color played a part in this. It really did.
Ziva, do you want to jump in here?
Yeah, I mean, the statistics show, that's why at Reveal it was important to us to get into the data and get past the anecdotes and the stories, and the statistics do show disparity. Native women are locked up at 3 times their representation of the population. Black women, there's twice, the representation. It's sometimes with the way the Census Bureau categorizes Hispanic women, it's difficult to measure. I'm sure that there's more of a disparity there. On top of that, there were wild differences in terms of sentence length. So our main character in the story was from Stevens County. They're number 3 per capita in locking up women statewide. She got a 20-year sentence for a first-time drug felony. And so you have a lot of cases where you have 7 women doing life in prison in Oklahoma for drug cases because of our 3 strikes you're out law. And so we have, the 85% law, which requires people convicted of certain crimes to serve 85% of their sentences. And then you have a 3 strikes you're out law. So these things combine to really lengthen sentences. So we did find some disparities based on where you live and what color you are.
I want to follow up with you about this. The generational aspect, how these incarceration rates seem to jump from generation to generation. What else did your data find?
Yes, we found our main character, there's a very sad scene in the beginning of our story, and you can read it on revealnews.org. Her daughter was in Mabel Bassett at the same time, so they were both arrested for a methamphetamine case. And they sort of crossed paths in Mabel Bassett and couldn't talk because they were co-defendants. And so you have the traumatic event of taking the mother out of the home. There's a lot of research that shows the impact of early childhood trauma, sexual abuse, physical abuse. A mother missing from the home does have a huge impact. And then the educational attainment of the child suffers, which sort of begins a downward spiral. And so there's been a lot of research about early childhood trauma, and it definitely, all of the women we talked to across the board had very traumatic stories about rape and sexual assault, those kinds of things. And then taking the mother out of the home, just compounds those problems.
I'll go to you, Patricia, and then I'll get you in, Steve.
I just want to throw this in real quick because you had said about the mothers and the daughter. Okay, so here in Oklahoma, we only have the 2 prisons, okay? But if you are related, if me and you are sisters and we are on the same yard, we're not allowed to talk because we're sisters, not because co-defendants, but they do have that rule about co-defendants.
Yes.
But if you are related, like so if me and my mom would have went, she would have to go to Mabel Bassett and I would have to go to Eddie's or something. But if we cross paths, we're not to communicate.
That's correct.
or anything.
There were two reasons why our main character, Robin Allen, couldn't talk to her daughter in prison. One was because she was her daughter, and one was because they were co-defendants. So it's a sad situation, but the common denominator is lack of education, early childhood trauma, not enough resources to investigate these issues and deal with them. And so it begins a path of addiction that's not treated. And sort of those early issues, like both of these gentlemen have said, have to be solved.
In everything that I've read about you, Steve, you always bring up the issue of families and children, that is really where your focus is in trying to improve the lives of families and children in this state. When you hear stories like this about the intergenerational aspect, what can be done to break that cycle?
Well, once again, as I'd indicated, I think we need to be much more proactive in our juvenile courts. Sometimes it just
What
takes...
does that mean when you say proactive in
Well,
juvenile?
when I was up in Washington County, rural county north of Tulsa, it was kind of unheard of in doing a deprived child action without removing children. And that made no sense to me. I was hearing stories of neglect and depravity, but not enough to remove children, and yet those are children in a bad environment, and you need to just get those parents in front of a judge and say, hey, you're screwing up. We don't want to take your kids. Can we help you with resources so that you can learn to be better parents? By the time I left Washington County, went to Tulsa County, I would venture to say 50% of our children cases were non-custodial type cases, where the whole goal was just infuse them with resources on the front end and then hopefully prevent their children from becoming delinquent or adult offenders, and hopefully teach the parents how to do a better job parenting. I'm a parent and my wife's a professional. We've got 3 daughters. I firmly believe through my faith that every person is a child of God, and they have a destiny, and I want them to realize that. And so in Tulsa County, one of the things we're very fortunate about, and this is probably the bigger conversation, I have friends in other states who have the exact same issues facing them. Tulsa County is very blessed because we have a very proactive nonprofit community, and they're sharing resources. A true reality of what goes on in Oklahoma is my office is funded less than 50% from the state. I have to come up with other ways to fund my office. These nonprofits have started to recognize maybe there ought to be some kind of public-private partnership. So thank goodness for the Women in Recovery program, because they are able to hear our voice and capitalize on and say, all right, what can we do to make the system better? Rather than kind of pointing a finger and saying, you're the reason for the problem, we're joining together to be the solution. The other part about it, and it's just how you train your prosecutors, I tell my people, I said, listen, you're not going to benefit as a society if you're putting people in prison all the time. You got to figure out who that person is right across from you. That's an individual. You can't cookie cutter that person into this is how we always do it. You got to find out more about that person to figure out where they're coming from, how they got there, and what it's going to take to get them fixed. And then finally, it takes that person's desire to want to be fixed. I can only bring the horse to water. I can't make the horse want to drink. So many times when you're dealing with addictive issues, you've got to get first past the addiction to help them realize, all right, now we got you cleaned up. How do we keep you out of the system? So it's much more labor intensive, but much more rewarding on the back end.
Do you believe prison's a deterrent?
Sure. Yeah, in many
Why?
instances. Well, I mean, I just got done prosecuting a guy who committed an armed robbery in one of my communities. He had previously got a robbery down in Texas, came to Oklahoma and goes in and commits an armed robbery at gunpoint. He's going to prison, and he's learning a very stiff lesson, which is I probably shouldn't commit this kind of conduct in the future.
But what about the women who we're talking about in this cohort?
It just depends, right? The conversation is defining justice. I don't think you can define justice without finding truth. There's always a story out there, and many of them can be very empathetic stories as delivered. We all have a truth, right? And it's whether we're being honest with ourselves about what has happened in our lives. I've dealt with many people, women and men, who have a lot of problems with addiction, and they will come up with a number of excuses to explain why they do what they do, but until they can get to the reason to answer the question, why are they doing it, you're never going to get that person rehabilitated. So the hardest part is always getting those people to answer, why are you doing this? And when they can get down that deep, then they start realizing the error of their ways. Of course, you know, do I want to put the people I'm angry at in prison? No. You know, that's the difference. I divide up prosecutions and the people I'm afraid of, the people who are committing murders, rapes, robberies, and then there's that other group that we're talking about, the ones you're angry at, who you're just like, would you please stop stealing? Would you please stop doing drugs? And it takes a lot of resources to help those people.
Patricia, from the people that you were with when you were in prison, do you believe prison was actually a deterrent for them?
I was gonna say, let me say this first. Earlier you made a comment saying that when you're in a smaller town, that you have the people, like, they're stealing, they were doing other things. I was not doing other things. I have never been in trouble. I have not caused any problems in my town. This was my first offense, and this is what happened to me. Now I know, like, there's other people in the world that have happened to. It's just unfortunate for me, but I just wanted to make that a point that I wasn't doing anything. There were no other crimes. There was nothing else. This was it.
I will probably just, I don't know enough about your case other than what I've read in the paper, but I'm sure that maybe the local law enforcement might have a different story, but I'd like to see that before I comment.
Well, I would like you to look that up too, because just so
I'll
you
be
can
glad
know
to.
for yourself, just for you,
I'll be
so
glad
you
to.
know. But another thing that I was gonna say, prison is not rehabilitation. I was not a criminal when I went in there. I knew nothing about how to survive or do anything in the prison system till I got there. I can honestly tell you, some of these girls are going in there just a little lost, okay? But now we're screwing them up because we're coming out and we're all jacked up. I'm jacked up, my sister's jacked. It's a lot. This is not rehabilitation.
Chris, is this what you see with the women that you work with?
Yes, so I tend to agree with Patricia. The reality is this. We are literally incarcerating more people than we ever have in the history of our state. If incarceration alone were a deterrent, our crime rates would be decreasing.
Right.
They're not. In fact, in many cases, they're increasing in certain categories. And let me just very quickly unpack what Patricia has just said. Here's the reality. When a low-level offender, and let me just be clear, because we have to base this conversation on the facts. In 2015, which is the last complete set of data that we have of who is entering the Department of Corrections in Oklahoma, 75%, 3 out of 4 of the individuals who were admitted to DOC custody in 2015 were for nonviolent offenses. That's the reality of what's happening.
And many of them were first-time felonies, too.
Many of them were first-time convictions as well. So that's the reality of what's happening in our state. Anecdotally, there may be some stories that are different than that, but statistically, 3 out of 4 are nonviolent offenders. Very quickly, here's what happens. When a nonviolent offender enters a period of incarceration, it can be a short period of time, it can be a long period of time. In fact, the studies that I've read indicate that the longer the period of time, the less likely that person is going to successfully transition back into the community, but they come back into the community now as a convicted felon. Let me be very clear, that felony conviction stays with that person for life. For life. It's a scarlet letter that excludes that person from participating pro-socially in the community. It knocks them out of most job opportunities, most housing opportunities. It limits their ability to pro-socially participate in the community. They have enormous fees and fines that they have to pay back in conjunction with their sentence because, oh, by the way, we're funding the majority of our criminal justice system on the backs of people who commit crimes today, and it's wrong. So they have to pay back these fees and fines. They have a family to take care of. Statistically, 84% of the women who are in prison in Oklahoma are moms. 72% have a child under the age of 16, 1 or more children under the age of 16, so they have a family to take care of after they pay back the fees and fines, but no place to live, no place to work. And then on top of that, whatever the core issue is that's driving the antisocial behavior, if it's addiction or mental illness, they're still battling that issue because they didn't receive the help, the treatment, the programming while they were in prison. It's not there. It doesn't exist. Matter of fact, if we're going to be honest, let me just tell you, if a person wants to use the entire time they're in prison in Oklahoma, they can use the entire time they're in prison in Oklahoma. They can if they want to. It's available.
Chris?
So they come out still battling that core addiction. And then the last thing I would just say, according to the research, individuals pick up additional antisocial behavior from being in that environment.
Yeah.
That's what Patricia is saying. If they weren't messed up before, they sort of don't get the help that they need, and they pick up these antisocial behavior. And it does not lead to positive outcomes. In fact, it often makes a bad situation worse. I'll end by saying this. If something doesn't change and change soon, we're going to need to rename our Department of Corrections, because we're not correcting anything.
I think the question I have for you after that is, so what's a district attorney to do? They have to do their job. What can be done to help district attorneys do their job in a more effective way so that we don't have to have conversations like this?
Alice and I have waited for 16 years for somebody to ask me how a district attorney ought to do his or her job. Teasing. I'm teasing. Listen, I have tremendous respect. I have respect for Steve. I have respect for all the district attorneys in the state of Oklahoma. The short answer is this: we have to work together. We have to work together. We have to see the value in addressing the core issues. We have to be smart about how we can do that. We have to understand that when we have a broken system, it doesn't make any sense to continue to fund or even fund that broken system at greater levels. We have to work together to seek treatment over punishment for people who battle addiction and mental illness. We have to be smart about the programmings within our communities that we can collectively support that will strengthen families and help individuals reach their full potential. And we have to understand that a person is so much more than their worst moment or their mistake in life. And we have to work together to get to that point. And then, last thing I would say, as a community, collectively, we have to support our district attorneys who are willing to and our judges and our elected officials who are willing to step out and support a paradigm shift in the way that we administer justice and corrections in the state of Oklahoma.
That brought me to my next question.
I look at my life as being, I'm going to live and die, and I hope to get to the next best place. So I'm going to be judged on the truth. And so what I have to do as a servant, whether I'm a political leader, a district attorney, or just a servant in my community, is focus on what the truths are. I can't drive down a road in Tulsa sometimes without seeing a homeless person and figure out we got a problem there. I can't recognize that things are working peachy when we have a mental ill population that can't even access services. I cannot ignore that from my faith perspective, nor from my district attorney perspective. So in many respects, I have to advance a social cause that necessarily, I would say, sir, from my background, necessarily always are going to intersect. What I say is it's kind of fun being Catholic because you can be really conservative and really liberal at the exact same time. And so I just try and encourage the people in my office. I don't preach what they ought to do from a religious standpoint, but from a very servant approach. What does your fellow man need? If they're a victim of a violent crime, make sure that the violent offender doesn't come back a second time to victimize somebody else. If they are a defendant who is mired in drug abuse or has been the victim of child abuse and it's affecting everything they do, try and help them get better so that they can live the life that they were ordained to live.
Chris, do you have anything to add?
Sure. So I think it's a great question, and I think it's a question that ought to be raised and ought to be pressed, quite honestly, because we are, and we boast about being the buckle of the Bible Belt. And if I'm going to be honest, if we're going to have an honest conversation, I want to tell you, I have observed individuals, officials, using their faith as justification to exclude and belittle and hurt other people. I've seen it. I think key components of the Christian faith include grace and mercy and forgiveness and redemption and second chances. So as we have a conversation as we have a conversation, and restorative justice, as we have a conversation about accountability for our elected officials who want to use their faith, and I'm not accusing people who sincerely believe what they believe, but I think we want to make sure that the faith also includes components that are extremely valuable and are intended to help others.
We have a question. Where's the mic? Right here.
Hi, my name is John Thompson. I retired from John Marshall and Centennial High School. And poor kids in Oklahoma County have an economic future projection below that of Baltimore County, with poor girls being way below. We're number one in the country with our kids having survived 4 or more traumas. When they come together in schools like where I taught at Centennial with these intense concentrations of kids who've been traumatized so much, we need far more social and emotional supports. How do we bring our public schools into this conversation to face up to the realities that people are honestly discussing here, but we don't want to face up to when it comes to our public schools?
Do you want to take that?
Well, I mean, that's a big topic, and I'm not a policy, I'm a journalist, and I looked at the way Oklahoma spends its money, and frankly, we have, 100 school districts where kids are going to school 4 days a week. And so it's very difficult for the schools to even keep the doors open and do the basic job of educating. Poverty plays a huge role in this. I think there was a study from Johns Hopkins in 2014 that Oklahoma ranked #1 in the nation in the number of those serious traumas. They had a list of them that kids underwent, and there's a lifetime impact. So you're exactly right, that those early traumas all feed into it. If there were money for counselors, there were money for people to provide services in schools, I think it would be great, but they can barely keep the doors open as it is.
Got a question in the back there? Young woman? Oh, there's a woman in the back, and then I'll get to you next.
Good afternoon. My name is Mariana Adams, and my question is for the district attorney. My question is, how does privatization of prisons relate to mass incarceration? And do you believe that individuals should profit off of incarcerating people, specifically officials or those who influence officials?
Chris had said something earlier, and I agreed with him. I've often thought it was an oxymoron to call it the Department of Corrections, because the evisceration of the services available within our incarceration system have gone. I can't imagine incarcerating a person who has committed sex crimes and just warehousing them without trying to figure out, how do I get this person to understand the defect in their reasoning. With programs, the Department of Corrections is being a lot more proactive lately. I think Candace Moore is here, who works within community sentencing with the state of Oklahoma, in trying to find a way to have kind of a women's diversion program, which is highly intensive, investing the therapy that is absent behind the criminal walls. It's, in my opinion, it's very problematic that my expectation is somebody's going to go in and learn a little bit about why they got themselves in that position in the first place, but without those services available to deal with some of the complex issues of mental health or drug addiction, it is crippling.
But she's talking about the issue of private prisons.
Okay, secondarily, you're right, in private prisons, the reality is this is a public problem, and our legislature is going to have to figure out how they want to prioritize how we're going to administer our criminal justice system. That was a legislative decision. My job is follow the law, enforce the law, let the courts determine what's an appropriate punishment. That is a legislative issue and a legislative solution.
You're champing at the bit on this one.
A little bit, yeah. So let me
little bit?
let me answer that. I'm not for sure, but let me just tell you this. Here's where I'm at. I think it's immoral. I think I think there's a perverse incentive, and please hear me because I want to be clear, I want to be fair about this. I think there's a perverse incentive built in for anybody who wants to make money off the backs of people's weaknesses or people who commit crimes. I think it's wrong for the private industry to do so. But let me be clear, if it's wrong for the private industry, it's equally wrong for government. Here's the reality. I've got 10 seconds. Here's the reality. The Department of Corrections, and I want to be clear about this, missing from this conversation is the fact that Oklahoma also has the highest ratio of inmates to correctional officers per capita of any state in the nation. My hat's off to the men and women who work for the Department of Corrections. I think they're doing the dead level best they can, given the limited resources they have. I agree with Steve on that, but here's the deal. The individuals, when they can't be placed in the Department of Corrections because there's no room, they're housed in county jails. And the Department of Corrections pays those county jails to house them until they can be placed. The Department of Corrections recently canceled like 10 contracts with 10 different counties because they couldn't afford to reimburse those counties. The counties, every one of them banded together and they sued the Department of the Corrections, and they said, you can't do that. We use that funding as a source of revenue for our counties. If it's wrong for the private industry, it's wrong for county government as well.
And Chris, I'll cut a deal with you. How about you and I go down to the legislature and you convince them to fully fund DA offices so that I don't have to collect my fees off of the backs of these people you're championing. I don't like it any more than you do.
All right, I think we're going to end on the fist bump.
Yes.
I think we're going to end on the fist bump. Please, everybody, thank our panel.
Thank you very much. Good job.
Great.
Can I hug you next?
Great. Thank you.
Yeah.
Excellent.
Perhaps we can end every conversation for the rest of the day with a fist bump. Thank you, Patricia, Chris, Steve, and Ziva. Thank you, Allison. Allison, you know that you're supposed to stay right there. Before we're going to welcome the governor of the state of Oklahoma, before I introduce the governor, I just want to mention one quick thing. A woman sitting next to me in the front row and leaned over and she said, are we going to be able to see a video of this? And so I just want to let everybody know that we are actually streaming this conversation live, and all of it will be archived at atlanticlive.com, so you'll be able to see all of it over and over and over again. And now to the governor. Last year, Governor Mary Fallin convened the Oklahoma Justice Reform Task Force to explore ways to lower the state's ballooning prison population. And while many of the recommended policies failed to pass the legislature, Oklahomans did vote yes on sentencing reforms, and those reforms took effect just a few months ago. So, please welcome Governor Fallin here to talk about justice reform and the way forward for Oklahoma.
Yeah, it's nice to meet you. Please have a seat.
Thank you. Hey, everybody.
Thank you, Governor, for being here.
Well, it's my pleasure. Thank you for being here, Allison. We appreciate Atlantic Magazine and also Google for helping to sponsor this along with other people. But we welcome you to Oklahoma.
Thank
and they were
you.
just telling me behind the stage that Atlantic Magazine is doing 3 of these, one in D.C., Los Angeles,
as well.
and in the heartland of America in Oklahoma. And we're the first.
Yes. I want to talk to you a little bit about your task force. I'm going to throw out a couple statistics, and then we're just going to have a conversation.
All right.
According to the task force you commissioned, that if Oklahoma stays on the course it is, by 2026, which scary enough is less than a decade away, Oklahoma's prison population will increase by 25% and 60% increase in the female population. So just let's start with an overarching question. What is the Oklahoma government's role in approaching this problem?
Well, of course, it's an issue that's very important to not only Oklahoma, but to America. To me, it's not a Republican or Democrat issue. It's an issue about success for individuals, success for their families. It's an issue about keeping the public safe from those who are dangerous criminals. And it's also about helping people who have addictions, maybe some mental health issues that need to be addressed that are not criminals, they're nonviolent, low-level offenders who just need a little extra help in society. And how can we find a better way, especially with being #1 in the nation, incarcerating women, I think the number is we're 165% higher than the national average in incarcerating women in Oklahoma, and the rate has been growing. And of course, we're number 2 in overall incarceration of men and women in the nation, which is not something I'm proud of. And I jokingly say, we in Oklahoma don't have meaner women, right, ladies? We don't have meaner women in Oklahoma. We just have some challenges that we need to help people with, such as substance abuse, addiction issues, maybe mental health issues. And so I've been trying to find a way over the years, many years, with a lot of extra help, as you heard the last panelist talk about, to educate our public, to look at best practices around the nation, to look what other states are doing, to find a better way to make sure we keep people that are dangerous locked up, but people who have low-level offenses that are nonviolent, to be able to find a better option, to be able to help them get the treatment and help that they need, and especially to divert them from going to prison in the first place.
Let's roll back a little bit of background from you. Can you remember a time in your life, not in your professional life perhaps, when you met a woman or someone's family who had someone in the family who was incarcerated? And what did you learn from that person?
Well, I can't say that I have met in my prior life to politics someone who had a member that was incarcerated. Now, I know people who are in my high school who are just acquaintances in the community, have addiction issues that were maybe picked up on some type of charge. And I have people, frankly, that I work with in state government that have a relative now that has alcoholism problems, maybe has some type of addiction to prescription drugs that are not dangerous, maybe dangerous to themselves because they're doing things they shouldn't be doing, but not a threat to the community itself or to other people. And so I think that's where a lot of my interest came in to helping on criminal justice issues, because there are a lot of people, as we know, we're having a big debate nationally about opioid abuse, prescription drug abuse, and how America is addicted to so many of our painkillers. And then when people get addicted, if they get really seriously involved in this stuff, then they can end up doing things to support their habits that could cause them to go to prison and potentially do things they shouldn't do.
What of those people that you have met who are attached or have some sort of association with incarceration in the Oklahoma prison system, what have they told you needs to be done? What have they confided in you about that?
Absolutely. And I've had the opportunity over the last many years, especially when I was lieutenant governor. I think it's where I really started focusing on this many years ago, was when I went to a Guthrie Center for women who had been sentenced from drug court into a program that would help them finish their education, get their GED, and that would get them substance abuse treatment, counseling, that would talk to them about work skills, how to show up to work on time, how to take care of your children. Children lose trust sometimes in their parents if their parents have problems because mom and dad have their own issues they're dealing with. And this program would get them those things, and then they would integrate the children back into the home with the mother to live so that bond and that trust could be reestablished. And in talking to those ladies, I can still remember sitting in kind of a circle with some chairs with about 8 women, and I asked them, I said, what's the most difficult thing for you? I mean, yes, you had some issues, you're dealing with them, but what's the most difficult thing for you? And they all said, the most difficult thing is being away from my children. It just kills me to be away from my children. And I want to get my life back in order so I can get a job, support them, put my family back together, and put my children on a better path. And when I was a young girl, my mother was a social worker, and there were times when she would, as a young girl, she would have to leave in the middle of the night to go pick up a child who was distressed in an abuse situation or maybe abandoned. And I can still remember those nights. My mother would go help that child and get him into some type of temporary home or even foster care at that time. And as I became from lieutenant governor to congresswoman to governor, then I began to see more of the effects of broken families and people who have substance abuse problems, people who are truly criminals that we need to keep locked up that are a danger, and then certainly the people who end up with lack of education and poverty on social welfare programs, foster care. We had over 11,000 children in foster care. Now we reduced it down to just a little under 9,000 because we're signing up more foster care families. But just the circle of problems that you have when you have people with challenges within their life.
Oklahoma has had this distinction of incarcerating women at a higher rate than the rest of the United States since 1991. So that's a good 26 years. And you've been in public office since 1990. Why have you taken an interest in this in the later years in your career, your political career right now?
Well, actually, it actually was not in my later years at all. I actually started working on this when I was lieutenant governor, and I worked with the status of the Commission of Women, and I was actually the chairman of looking at women incarcerated. We held many public forums during that time. We issued a report back during that time with recommendations to the legislature. But frankly, it's hard to get people to really delve into criminal justice issues, because I think in the past, and I was a former legislator, as you mentioned, back in 1990, it was kind of taboo to talk about criminal justice reform. And that was during an era when we went through as a nation the 3 strikes, you're out type of mantra. And so then I became lieutenant governor. I went on to Congress, and then I came back home, and then as governor, I've been working on this about the past 4 to 5 years now. It's not something I started this year, but 4 to 5 years. But it's been hard to get the legislature, and frankly, a lot of our law enforcement people are certainly starting to pick up the understanding that there are other options of how you treat people that are low-level offenders, and that we need to keep our prisons for those who are dangerous to society.
To your point, the National Council on Crime and Delinquency talked about, they have a really interesting statement about why punitive measures are different from state to state. And I want to read this to you. It's a little bit long. I'll try to not stretch it out. Differences in punitiveness are more likely explained by the laws, policies, and practices and beliefs and attitudes of elected officials and the public influencing each state's response to crime. So I want to take the first part of that. What laws, policies, and practices have led to Oklahoma incarcerating so many women?
Well, like I said, it goes back into the 80s, the 90s, when the United States had a lot of laws, the 3 strikes you're out, that were put into place, the belief that you need to put people in for longer prison sentences. I know as I became governor, I used to do every single parole that came through my office. The law required that I look at everything, no matter what the offense was. They've changed it now to where it's more serious offenses, and low-level offenses just go to the Pardon and Parole Board. But I would be sitting there every single week looking through 200 to 300 applications, and I would read these backgrounds of how do people get into this situation. And one of the things that I found was the inconsistency throughout the decades in sentencing. There were people who would have possession of some sort, and they might be sentenced to life in prison. And that was one of the things that we worked hard to change the past couple of years. And once again, it takes a while to change that attitude in your state and to educate the public so they don't give the elected officials a hard time when it comes to a re-election. Frankly, I'm just being frank about this. But that's why when State Question 780 and 781 passed by about 65%, because there were a lot of people, including myself, former Speaker Chris Still, some of the district attorneys, and other civic leaders that have been speaking here today, that have been talking about the results of not reforming your criminal justice system. And we're not the only state in the nation that's done this. I mean, I was looking at a list of states that have recently done criminal justice reform. You've got Texas, Georgia, South Dakota, Utah, Florida, Kentucky, South Carolina, Arkansas, Mississippi. And you know what? Those are all conservative states. So when I went back to say it's not a Democrat or Republican issue, it's an American issue that, families have to deal with substance abuse, addiction, poverty, a child out of a home because a parent may have some type of mental health crisis going on in their life. And I've asked crowds this throughout the years when I've spoke about criminal justice reform. Is there anybody in this room that has not known someone that's had some type of substance abuse issue? Whether it's been someone in high school, someone you might work with, someone you know in the community, or someone has a relative, and nobody ever raises their hand that they don't know somebody. And so I think the more we talk about this as a nation, which we have, the more we can help change the laws and change legislation.
So that goes to the second part of that statement about attitudes and beliefs. Talk to me a little bit about how do you approach criminal justice reform in a conservative state, and you are a true conservative, where one of the mantras of being a true conservative is tough on crime. How do you do criminal justice reform and maintain being tough on crime and maintain your true conservative roots?
Well, I think I've proven that that can be done. And if you look at Texas, who is one of the leading states from years past, and everybody likes to talk about Texas and how they reduced their incarceration rate, but yet they haven't seen an increase in crime. They've reduced the need for prison beds. I think it's a matter of talking about how do you be smart on crime, but also tough on crime for those who might harm you. Nobody wants a murderer out there running around, or someone that's a rapist or sex offender or something like that out in their state. But like I said, we all know there are people who might be off their medication, might have some type of alcohol substance abuse treatment, and there are times when you have to, when you have a friend or you have a relative and said, that's enough, you know, you have to interrupt what's going on in their life so they will change and get their life back on a more useful, productive path.
This is interesting. I obviously doing research for this, and I was reading the website The Daily Caller, which is a conservative website. It's founded by Tucker Carlson and Neil Patel, who was Vice President Cheney's one of his assistants, and they wrote about, they've been following you and your criminal justice reform, and I read the comments section, and it was interesting. And the headline of this particular article was, Governor Pushes Against Female Incarceration. And here were some of the responses. Seems sexist to me, why only women? Women want equality with all the easy stuff, not the hard stuff like doing hard time for the crimes you commit. I'm all for criminal justice reform, but not just softer for women.
Well,
what's your response to that?
You know, I don't read my own Facebook. I would advise you not to read yours either half the time, especially when you're in public office, you don't. Because there are a lot of people who will say things, but I haven't been pushing just for women, frankly. I mean, yes, we are number one in the nation, and frankly, as a woman, that's a great concern. And I'm a woman, I'm trying to do something about it. I don't see anything wrong with that. But I'm also addressing criminal justice in a broad sense. I mean, I don't just talk about women. I've been invited to a couple of women's events. This is the second one. Mm-hmm. And we launched our first one nationally called Women Unshackled, which was a couple of months ago. We had a great response to that. But my policies aren't just aimed at women, it's aimed at the issue. How do we be smart on crime? How do we have ways to divert people from going to prison? There are some great programs in Oklahoma, the mental health courts, the drug courts, the family courts, the veteran courts. Those are all things I pushed for many years. And we have programs like Remerge, which is here in Oklahoma City, Women in Recovery, which is a great program, the HERS program. We have 3 crisis centers. We only had 1 in Oklahoma when I started office. I put in money to have 3 crisis centers in our state. We have coordination. We never had coordination between corrections and mental health. I mean, think about that. A lot of the problems that people face when they may end up in the system is because they're dealing with mental health issues, but we didn't have a system to where we actually assess what is going on in this person's life. What's the real cause of this? And so now mental health does a risk assessment with our Department of Corrections, and it is working, much better. It helps on recidivism. It helps on diverting people. And we got great statistics on keeping people out of the system once they go through Emerge or Women in Recovery type programs.
Let's talk about your task force, the 27 recommendations that were made. Out of the recommendations, which ones did you read and say, yes, I think we can accomplish that in Oklahoma, and which ones did you read and think, that is going to hit resistance?
Well, we had, I put a task force together. They worked, over a year. Mm-hmm. So it wasn't something we just took a month and said, okay, let's just do this, this, and this, and let's go for it. I mean, it was thoughtful, intense study that we took national surveys. We were the Pew Foundation, some other organizations. The Criminal Justice Network helped us also on that study. We had judges, we had DAs, we had criminal defense attorneys, we had mental health counselors, we had corrections, we had victims' rights groups, and we took a combination of many, many different entities to get a broad-based look, and to be fair to everyone that's involved in the system, and there's a lot of people involved in the system that it touches organizationally and nonprofit-wise, and certainly state and federal government. And they came out with recommendations because our prison population is expected to go at the rate that we're incarcerating people and sentencing people, 25% over the next 10 years. That's a lot of people. Like I said, we're already number 2 in the nation on men and women incarcerated, number 1 in women. And it's a path of failure. If we don't help people that are nonviolent, low-level offenders stay out of the system and go maybe to a mental health court, a drug court, a family court, whatever crisis it is, help with the risk assessment to get them to the right programs, we're going to keep putting people in this generational curse of poverty that just doesn't work for our state.
Are the preventative measures the ones you think you can get?
Yes, I've been trying to put more money. In fact, the first couple of years I was in office, I put, I think it was about $16 million more into mental health. Mental health had been one of those agencies that the legislature typically hadn't particularly wanted to ever plus up or fund more. We funded 2 new crisis centers. We started doing more coordination between corrections and mental health. We did the first Pay for Success program. It passed in 2014. We had initiated it to pay for a nonprofit group, the Women in Recovery group in Tulsa, which has been very successful.
That's the Women in Recovery?
Yes, Women in Recovery, very successful, that instead of sending women to prison, if they agreed to go through this program, we would pay as a state, which is a lot cheaper, by the way, than sending them to prison, to put them into this program, and if they stayed clean, stayed out of prison, then we would pay on the backside to reimburse that nonprofit. It's a partnership, the first of its kind in the nation, that we are doing, and I have great hopes for it, and I think it's going to be very successful.
One of the things in the task force report that caught my eye was on page 4, and it described what the task force was charged with. And the first thing, criminal justice corrections and policy reform. Number 2 is to identify cost-effective, evidence-based sentencing, holding offenders accountable but reducing recidivism. 3, estimating resulting savings from the recommendations. And 4, identifying opportunities to reinvest the savings into policies and to reduce recidivism,
Right.
and improve reentry outcomes. I found it interesting, 3 of those talk about finance and money. Does this come down to money?
Well, certainly if you can save taxpayers' money, if you can put someone in a productive job supporting their families and keep those children with their families instead of having to go to prison or be incarcerated, it is about money. It's about money for the success of that person to be able to support themselves, be a contributing member to society. It's about being wise with your money. If there's a better program that helps people get on the right track by getting their GED, getting counseling, substance abuse, some vocational skills. We also have vocational training that can help people once they're released from prison, which I think is very important too. And we need, by the way, we need money, more money for all those things. There's never enough money. But there has been this movement to help divert people, to provide them with substance abuse, diversionary programs, to work with private nonprofit successful programs that have very low recidivism rate. Yes, that is a major goal. So yes, in a sense, it is about being smart on crime, smart with your money, and protecting the public at the same time.
While you've been able to get certain reforms through, other ones have stalled, and I know you had some pushback from some of the representatives, and I got a letter which described some of your reforms in this way. I believe it's from Representative Biggs. He said, this past session, a package of bills regarding reckless criminal justice reform was introduced by the governor and considered by the legislature. Why would he call these reckless?
Well, everybody's allowed to have their personal opinion. I'm about good policy, and I'm about trying to find things that will help people be successful, yet protect the public. I don't think there's anybody in this world that says, well, let's not worry about people, let's just let them out and hope for the best. Nobody thinks that, and I certainly don't think that. We, as I've said many, many times, we want to be smart on crime, but yet we want to keep people who are of a danger to society or even a danger to themselves. I mean, there are just some people that get out of control, and they need to be put in some type of program to help them get their life back in order or get straight. But
How do you work around this, though?
oh, I go to the media. I go to things like this. I go to the public.
Public support? Is that-
Yeah, public support is very, very important, and I push back. I mean, I asked him to come to my office this week and talk to me about this letter, so. You know, and I told him, I said, look, you want to do the same things I want to do. You want to keep the public safe. I want to keep the public safe. I just think there's a better way of dealing with low-level, nonviolent offenders. If you have challenges, as he mentioned in that letter, with some of the languages, and I guess maybe he misunderstood some of the task force recommendations. He kept referring to some other statute which had nothing to do with what we were trying to do. Maybe I'll just assume it was not intentional to put it that way. But, you know, I said, we're willing to work with you. We want to keep people safe too. There is nothing in my bones that says we don't want people to be safe. But we can help people be diverted from the system. We can help people with substance abuse issues. We can keep our children out of foster care. We can help men and women who have these issues, and we can be smarter with our money and invest in programs that will actually make a difference.
You had that list of states which have gone through criminal justice reform in some way. You're promoting this. I know you're a supporter of the president. His attorney general has a very different point of view
Yeah, I need to
about
have a
this.
discussion with him.
Excuse me?
I need to have a discussion
Or
with
do,
him.
I was going to ask you, had you, and do you plan to?
No, I haven't had a chance to talk to Attorney General Sessions, but I would welcome the opportunity to talk to him about some of the successful things that we're doing and some of the successful things that other states are doing. And as I mentioned earlier, all the states I listed a few moments ago are conservative states that think there are better ways to help America be successful and safe.
In an op-ed in Tulsa World, this is my last question, the writer wrote, "We are a fiercely conservative state and change comes slowly in Oklahoma, but the thaw in our frozen thinking about criminal justice has begun." Why do you think the thaw has begun?
Well, I think because of Chris Steele, who's done a wonderful job with teen ministries. The district attorney from Tulsa, you know, has done a good job. He explained that. You had Mrs. Spocro, to say that right, who talked a few moments ago about her experience in the system and the investment of concerned individuals into programs like Remerge and Women in Recovery, the HERS program, and there's a lot of them out there. The district attorneys that have set up mental health courts, the drug courts, the family courts, the veterans courts, those people who are starting to invest in that. And I hear the DAs, they need more money. I hear that. And I hear the DAs that they want us to put more money towards treatment programs and community sentencing and other alternatives so that we don't have to send people into a system where they really do end up with some pretty bad people that could show them other ways that we might not want them to see.
I said that was my last question, but I fibbed. I have one more. For the average person who's listening to this and lives in this state and says, I want to live in a safe state, I'm living a good life, I'm doing the right thing, what's in it for them to support criminal justice reform?
Well, first of all, like I said, we need to save our beds, our prison beds, and our money. It's you know, close to $30,000 to incarcerate somebody, and it's taxpayer money. We pay for that, but we want to save those beds for those who are dangerous to society, that are true criminals, that are violent, that need to be put away to keep us safe in our homes and our businesses. But for those who have, like I said, I'm going to keep repeating it, low offenses.
But for the average person, what's in it for them?
What's in it for them is that their communities are safe, and that heaven forbid if they should ever have a friend, a daughter, a son, a mother, a father, a veteran that returns back from war, a person that goes and has surgery on their knee and they're taking some oxycodone, and all of a sudden they're a normal person, and all of a sudden they're having problems and not thinking straight. What's in it for them is that we're focusing on programs that can be smart to help their loved ones, but yet keep them safe.
Governor Fallon, thank you so much.
Thank you. All right. Thank you so much. Thank you for coming today and participating.
Thank you, Governor Fallon, and thank you so much, Allison. Oklahoma's business community has been at the forefront of the justice system reform conversation. The Greater Oklahoma City Chamber of Commerce is working to fix overcrowding in the county jail, and here to talk about that effort is a member of the Chamber's Criminal Justice Task Force, Tony Tyler, a vice president at Tyler Media. He's here with David Fritzie, the executive editor of the nonprofit investigative reporting organization, Oklahoma Watch. David, take it away.
Thank you. Tony, our subject is the jail, and as you may know, that the jail, the Oklahoma County Jail, has been really a scandal of sorts for many years. It was built for 1,200 inmates, and last year, maybe the year before, the count exceeded 2,500. In 2015, 27% of the admissions were women. Now there was talk of building a new jail, floating a bond, financing this, and people stepped back, and the chamber stepped back and said, wait a minute, let's step back and look at this a little more broadly. And so the task force was created, and you decided to be a part of the leadership of that task force. So I wanted to ask first, I'm sure there was a lot of fact-finding, and they came to you and started laying out for you this picture of what's going on in the jail, and I wondered what your reaction was when the facts started coming in.
Great question, David. Yeah, it was startling, frustrating, disappointing. It is something, and we recognize this and admit this, it's something as a community and as a business community we had been avoiding for way too long. This has been a problem. It had been brought to our attention lots of times, and it was easy to ignore. You look the other direction, you hope everybody who's in there are the bad guys, and so you just turn a blind eye to it. Fortunately, the Department of Justice pointed out that we were egregious, and we needed to make some changes. And there was a realization when they brought, you need a new jail, that we stepped back, and our leadership said, that may not be the answer. And so they brought us this data. We did bring in Vera to study this, and they brought us the data of things that we were doing wrong. And so the cool thing that happened before we even finished our study, the task force study, changes started happening just on their own recognition of things that they could do differently, and made lots of headway before the report was ever published last December.
So people would ask, why is the chamber, why is the business community so interested in overcrowding in the jail? What would motivate the business leaders to get so involved?
There's lots of factors there, and the root of it is what we discovered here earlier, the passionate conversation that occurred earlier. It's about the people. People of Oklahoma, we're amazing. We care about each other. It was revealed to the world, unfortunately, back in 1995, and we're great people. And I think there was finally a realization that we weren't bringing the entire community along, and there was a group of our population that weren't being brought along with the progress that the city had been making for so long. There's economic reasons that we can continue to talk about on why that's important, but the truth of it is it's the people.
Well, do you think that a condition of a jail or its tendency to incarcerate so many people would affect economic development for a city?
Sure. When somebody's in jail, people understand the math. When somebody's in jail, it costs us to have them in there, and then they're also unable to provide for their family. So there's a dual-edged sword there, of almost punishment, if you will, to your wallet. We're paying for somebody to be incarcerated, and they're not contributing monetarily to the society. It even stems further, how bad are we hurting their family? And that has additional negative financial repercussions, emotional as well.
So why, they ask you to be involved, why choose to, I'm sure you're involved in many organizations, civic groups. Why did you want to become a part of this task force?
When Mr. Bennett asks you to do something, you usually do it.
That's Clay Bennett, in case, for those of you who may not know. Education is very important to me. And a friend of mine who is a professor at the University of Oklahoma, he's written a book about the incarceration system in Oklahoma, our jail system, a country called prison. And it's fascinating. And so he got me understanding that part of the challenges with our incarceration problems are the educational system. And so I saw this as an opportunity to grow my knowledge and maybe help the whole bigger picture of how we make changes. I'm curious, were there any personal reasons? Do you have any family, friends, colleagues, employees who've had experiences with the jail or the justice system in Oklahoma?
Yes. 77%, there's a study that says 77% of the Oklahoma population is affected by somebody being in prison, jail, county, or whatever. And so it's recently had a coworker who made some bad choices and was pulled over and in part of our state and wound up having to have to go to jail over the weekend and got severely in debt because of that. We kept the person employed, great person, great parent, and so we saw an opportunity to help this person. But I think had we not been there as a company to give this person that support, they would have been driven down into further depths of society, of debt and lots of other things. They're having trouble recovering as it is, even with our help. We employ people who have been in jail, felons, and thank you. They're good people. We all make bad choices. People who make bad choices, all of us, we have the right to try and fix those things. We have the right to try and learn from those things. That's what we're supposed to do. And so we've got to start giving people these chances. There are people who need to be in jail, without question. But there's not as many that should be in there that are in there now.
There are a lot of different sort of agents and groups involved in this task force. You had prosecutors and people from the justice system, civic leaders, and then, of course, the public in general. There's naturally a lot of tension in the justice system for deciding policy. So did any of that tension come to the fore in trying to come up with recommendations or make that final vote on what to do?
Yes.
Who was fighting?
We saw a little bit of it earlier in the discussion of when you bring people to the table, they are passionate about their beliefs. But when you bring people, you bring data, you bring your feelings, you bring your caring, you're able to talk about the hard things and you come up with solutions. And we don't do a lot of that. We can blame the technological world that we have out there today or whatever, but we don't have human interaction. And if I've got a problem with you, I need to come to you and I need to try and address it. We need to try and work it out. I don't think we're doing enough of that. I'm glad that this conversation started. The chamber didn't set out to fix the criminal justice system. They set out to think, to study if there was a better way to fix our county jail system. Fortunately, the state of Oklahoma jumped on, Tulsa County jumped on, and there's lots of people trying to make big changes, and it's very exciting.
There were a number of recommendations that came out of the lengthy report issued from the task force, and those range from finding alternative sentencing strategies, mental health, substance abuse, trying not to find a way not to put people in jail for, say, failure to pay fines and fees and for committing low-level municipal offenses. Did anything in those findings or in those recommendations strike you as something that would be particularly effective?
Several things. The one thing that I want to point out I think is important is the advisory council that's going to come out of that study. And we're going to set up, it's an interlocal agreement between the county and multiple cities that still needs to be okayed by the Attorney General. But once that's okayed, it's going to have a staff and it's going to be able to watch over this system. part of the problems that have occurred is things are done in silos. And I think most of it is all unintentional. But when you get those silos together and you have some oversight over it and kind of make sure everybody's continues to play well together, we don't lose sight that it's about the people instead of just executing laws.
I wanted to ask you too about the stations your company has, radio and television, serve some minority communities. So how did you think, how important are these changes for those communities?
Great question. I think it's important for everybody, and the Hispanics, the African Americans, women, men. We have to understand we're putting too many people in jail, and so it's going to affect all races, men and women, and that's good. That's going to come out of this. And so, yes, there will be great benefits to the Hispanic community in which we serve, but those benefits are going to be recognized all across the board, and that's important.
How much do you think that incarceration of men and women, do you think that you were looking mainly at the jail level, of course, but at the state level, Oklahoma County still tends to send a lot of inmates, a lot of people to our prisons. So what's your hope about this process and how that might play out at the state level?
It's exciting to see everybody engaged on this conversation, and I think if we all recognize the challenge, and I think that's happening, that there's going to be benefits at the state level. As we saw earlier, the benefits at the Tulsa County already. We've gone from 2,600 people in the jail in the last year down to 2,000. And that's awesome. Judge Trong and some of our local judges are energetic and passionate. They're going down on evenings and weekends and letting people out of jail. You know, you're not supposed to be here, and they're letting people out on their own reconnaissance, and it's so cool. So I think we need to recognize at the local level and at the state level, change is necessary, and we do want to make the best change. We want to make the right decision. But we just need to change, and it might be a mistake, but if we do our best, we're going to learn from it, and then let's change some more, and let's change some more. This is a process. We're 1907, we're 110 years old. It took us that long to get here. It's going to take us a little time to get out of it. We're not going to fix it from next February to May. So, but let's try.
Before I take any audience questions, I wanted to ask, so what's the follow-up? Will the business community remain involved in trying to stop jailing so many people in Oklahoma County?
Yes, this is something that is of interest. The Chamber will stay involved. This advisory council that is being put together is going to have involvement from the Chamber. It's very necessary that this is an ongoing entity and a forever entity, and the business community is very engaged in this. You know, some of the economic things that we need to point out is employment. You know, we've had such a great run here in Oklahoma City with the passage of the MAPS TAC. It's been such a transformational thing that we've done for ourselves, and we're realizing that the talent pool, we haven't brought everybody along, like I said earlier, and so we've got to better educate our people, and that doesn't just mean in school. We've got to it's life skills and all kinds of things that we've left behind. Yes, we're going to stay involved.
Any questions for Tony? There's one.
Okay. My name is Lindsay Canali, and I'm just a community enthusiast. How can the business community lead the way in employment of convicted people? For instance, banning the box, doing things like that that will allow and give people opportunities to actually gain employment after being incarcerated?
Great question, and thank you for being a community enthusiast. We need people like you doing that. Absolutely, we have to recognize that being a felon isn't a reason to throw you out. That's not acceptable. And it took us a while to understand that. And I'm glad that we have recognized that, and we need to keep pushing that movement. You know, so many people have had to go to or have chosen to go to the online employment application. And I know you got to have filters, but I want to get to know you. I want to know who you are. I want to know what you do, who your family is. Are you financially secure? If you're not, how can I help you? 'Cause if you're not good at home, or you're not good, your banking account's not very good, you're not going to be that good at work either. So we try very hard to get to know our coworkers and help them through their challenges, because if they're happy at home, they're happy at work. We don't want them escaping at home to come to work. And so, yes, there are things that we can do. I will add to that, we need to be taught too. We need to know what those things are. A plumber sets out to plumb. He doesn't necessarily, or she doesn't necessarily know how to run a business. And so we need help too, being taught how to remove those barriers. Great question. Thank you.
Question in back.
Good afternoon. My name is Jessalyn Head. I'm the COO of the Coltrane Group. I think also that privatization is a major issue within our justice system, and the inequity amongst people who are poor, who cannot afford to get a ritzy lawyer to get them off, and other effects that have occurred. I wonder if the chambers of commerce, who seem to come from a more conservative viewpoint, they're known for that, but not necessarily is that always the case. But if they could talk with some of the private owners of these prisons, trying to encourage them to approach a more intervention-oriented system, something that is more programmatically focused for those incarcerated, at minimally those women, first-time offenders, mothers of younger children with, it's
Sure.
a multifaceted issue, I know that.
Well, the question seems
But
to
it
be...
seems as if we could talk with the private owners to encourage them to have a more compassionate view and programming that is geared towards correcting and addressing those issues that face many of these women, that is more prevention-oriented against recidivism, that is more focused on behavior adjustment.
Sure. Well, I think, absolutely. I think we also need to step back, though, and say, what have we asked them to do? All we've asked them to do is to jail people and feed them and not treat them inhumanely. So, you know, we've got to be careful to if that's what we want to do, we got to realize what we have asked them to do. The system is broken. And so when the DA has to come up with half his budget through fines and court costs, and that's a problem. And that list just goes on and on and on and on. And so I think it does wind up with the correctional system. It's privatized or it's state-run. We have to be careful to throw stones at that private business. We've asked them to do a job. We've given them the opportunity, and they've come to the table. And yes, they have to make money so that they can feed their families and feed their employees' families and things like that. Profit isn't a bad word. Gross profit, we can debate that. But so we have to recognize that they aren't necessarily the bad person here, but we do need to continue to have that dialogue on how to do this better.
I would like to follow up with one question. You're in the media business. Do you think the media should be doing anything differently in its coverage of the jail issues and criminal justice and female incarceration? Your stations.
I think we can do a better job. I think our community news stations has done a fantastic job trying to dig into this and uncover this. Your organization, the Oklahoman, Can we do more? Sure, we can do more. We have some challenges in doing that with how people want to consume their data and whether they want to pay for it or not. But yes, we all need to do, and we all need to. As part of one of the task force that came out of this, or one of the subcommittees that came out of this, is we're trying to go evangelize this to the people who don't know. And so not only does the media need to talk about it, but it needs to be talked about at the water cooler too. So we all need to take what we're learning and tell more people about it that we've got a problem.
Do you think coverage is too exploitative at times of crime and jailing, or do you think?
I think for the most part, recently, it's all mostly been well-intentioned. I do think sometimes there is that overemphasizing of those things, but I really feel like they've tried to do a good job here recently.
One last question.
Aaron Wendelboe with the OU College of Public Health. I wanted to follow up on your MAP statement. It seems like there's a disconnect between conservative or Republican values about saying categorically no new taxes, but then recently in Oklahoma County, Oklahoma City, we just passed a bunch of measures in the state election that said we're willing to tax ourselves because we see some problems. You know, this round was in the infrastructure, but it seems like the population sees there's a problem, that money's a problem, and we're willing to do something about it. What's the business's angle on what I perceive as a disconnect?
I try and look at things that aren't Democratic or Republican. I try not to look at things where we have to separate ourselves. I have a personal belief that the people in Oklahoma have a 90% agreement on things. And I would love for us to start our conversation about fixing anything with that 90% of things that we agree upon, 95, 96% of the things we agree upon. Let's fix those things. We don't have to ignore the things that we disagree on, but we want to start there and never come to an agreement. We could fix so much and then sort out these challenges, but instead we want to start here and not do anything.
Thank you for your time. Thanks for the questions.
Thank you. David, great job.
Thank you very much, Tony. Thank you, David. And next up, we have a session from our underwriter, Google. And before we welcome our speaker, we're going to watch a video together. It's called Love Letters, and it's part of a Google initiative using digital storytelling to illuminate mass incarceration. Let's watch.
We're so lucky to spend Mother's Day together, but there are hundreds of thousands of kids whose moms are incarcerated this Mother's Day.
So we wanted some kids to share letters that they wrote it to their moms. Dear Mom, hi Mom, I miss you very much.
I know I don't write you a lot, but this letter right here is actually pretty special.
Your second Mother's Day away, I took to Facebook and posted, I love my mother.
But most of all, I miss your love. I miss your hugs.
Every Mother's Day, I listen to all of our favorite songs.
I think about you all the time. At night, when I'm getting ready to go to bed, it makes me think of the most amazing mom that I have. I miss playing with you and sleeping with you at night.
I miss your smile, and I miss how you always used to say funny things on Facebook and post that. I miss how you used to walk. I can't do it.
I've been having some personality issues. By that I mean my sexuality, and I wish you weren't in prison so you could be here to help me with it.
School is kind of good, but fighting in school is difficult.
Recently, I was inducted for the National Honor Society at my school.
Something good that's happened to me recently is that I went roller skating.
Mom, I love riding bikes because I just love riding them.
Dear Mom, I will always love you no matter what happened.
And I can't wait to see you.
From your firstborn, Tyshante. Happy Mother's Day.
I love you, Mom. Sincerely, Giovanna. Happy Mother's Day!
Love, Sanaya, your favorite daughter.
Happy Mother's Day.
below to see more love letters to moms.
Love letters, thank you for that, Google. And now it is my pleasure to welcome Malika Sadasar. She's Google's Senior Counsel on Civil and Human Rights, and she is here to talk about Google's criminal justice system. Malika?
Thank you. It really is an honor and privilege to be able to be with you here today and to share with you love letters, which we are committed to doing every Mother's Day and every Father's Day. I want to begin by saying that this is the community and this is the work that I come out of, that I spent 15 years doing human rights work on behalf of women and children behind bars. I worked alongside women who had to make a Sophie's choice between treatment or their children because there were few treatment programs that allowed them to bring their babies. I worked alongside women who explained to me that they were using crack cocaine or meth to numb themselves after years of sexual abuse that started when they were children. I worked alongside women who had been shackled behind bars during childbirth. I worked alongside women who talked to me about how when they were behind bars, they were only allowed to touch their children who visited at the first moment of seeing them, and then when they said goodbye, that they couldn't hold their baby's hands throughout the visit. These are the women that I worked with, and these women taught me everything about grace and resiliency. A year and a half ago, the amazing human rights lawyer, Brian Stevenson, came to Google, and he challenged us as a company to bear witness, to be proximate to the human costs of mass incarceration. And since then, we have tried to honor his plea. We have tried to recognize the opportunity that we have at Google to be able to use our different platforms to tell the stories of maternal incarceration, to tell the stories of children whose parents are behind bars, to be able to make real and make plain what it means to incarcerate so many individuals, so many families, so much of our community in this country. This is the work that we are doing. We are so thrilled and honored to partner with Atlantic to be able to do these forums here in Oklahoma, as well as in LA and Washington, DC, as yet another opportunity to be able to give voice and access to understanding what mass incarceration is. So I thank you today. I thank you for allowing us to be here, allowing us to be a witness to the stories and the struggles here. And I want to leave you with a sizzle reel that we've been working on at Google. It's in production, it's not quite done, to be able to share with you why it is that we are doing this work and what we hope to be able to do in using our different platforms at Google, at YouTube, to disrupt mass incarceration. Thank you.
Being lost, dreams and hope and justice are being lost.
We're at a tragic moment where every day that we go without acting, there are people in America who are living examples of how we are violating our principles and ideals as a country.
How do we allow this to continue? Where lives are being lost, dreams and hope and justice are being lost.
We're at a tragic moment where every day that we go without acting, there are people in America who are living examples of how we are violating our principles and ideals as a country.
We like to think of Google as a platform for disruptive innovation, and not just disruptive innovation for its own sake, but to do something good in the world, to do something powerful in the world, to make the world a better place. And if there's anything that needs to be disrupted today, it's the system of mass incarceration.
This issue is at the center of all of our work and communities and lives, that it is not marginal.
This work really aligns with how we think of ourselves as a company and what we think we're here to do.
It is part of how we can use our goodness and use our wisdom and use our platforms to make sure that we live in a society where everyone is valued.
Now, in the last year, we at Google have made some commitments of over $5 million to racial justice and criminal justice reform organizations, but that's just our start. Because it is about fairness, inclusion, and access, core values of this company.
There are great people, there are creative people, talented people, and through these bursts of creativity and energy, they do something amazing.
And welcome to the first ever Google Summit on Justice Reform.
Google is a company that has been greatly blessed, to whom much is given, much is required. When you use your voice, people listen. When you champion a cause, our leadership listens. You may say, am I my brother's or sister's keeper? And I say to you to that, if not you, then who? If not now, then when?
Thank you for that, Malika, and thank you again to Google for all this and for making today possible. I'm going to do something that we are sometimes reluctant to do because we don't want anybody to walk out of the room, but you have all been sitting here so attentively and beautifully. So I'm going to give you a 7th inning stretch under one condition. You can stand up, you can talk to your neighbor, you can stretch your arms, but I don't want you to leave because what's coming up in the rest of the afternoon is extraordinary and I don't want you to miss it. So with this, all rise. Stretch your arms. So I hate to do this, but here's what I promise. clearly everybody has started conversations that they're going to want to finish. So I need everybody to sit back down with the promise that at the end of this afternoon, you're going to have plenty of time to talk to the people you just began conversations with now. So when everybody's seated, we're going to get started with our last two sessions. And I know that was a little bit of a stingy stretch, but I hope you feel better. All right. Do I have everybody's attention? Because next we're going to zoom in on something that we've been talking about, a theme that has been threaded throughout the afternoon, and that is what happens to mothers what happens to children when their mothers go to prison. The whole last segment from Google really underscored all of that. And as we heard before, more than 8 out of 10 of the women in Oklahoma's prisons are mothers, many of them primary caregivers to young children, or at least they were anyway before they went to prison. We have several women who know a lot about this issue, so please welcome Sheila Harbert, the Chief Community Outreach Officer at Girl Scouts of Eastern Oklahoma. Hi, Sheila. Sorry I messed up your name there.
That's okay.
Demaria Monday, the Oklahoma chapter leader of the National Council for Incarcerated and Formerly Incarcerated Women and Girls. And Patrice James, an attorney and external relations director at Still She Rises Tulsa. Still She Rises Tulsa is an organization that represents indigent women in North Tulsa. And back to lead the conversation is PRI's Allison Herrera.
Thanks so much for all of you ladies joining me. We've just had some spirited conversations in the back room about motherhood, and the title of our panel is, Does Motherhood Make a Difference? And yes, it does. And like we just heard, 8 out of 10 women in prison are mothers. We also know that women of color are also overrepresented in the prison system. So we're going to talk a little bit about some of the things that you all are doing to help moms reconnect with their children, and help and be an advocate for children, because like we all know, incarceration doesn't just affect the people that are inside, but also the children who are outside, and reconnecting with their parents. And I just wanted to start with a quote that Susan Sharp, who is on the next panel after this, she said something in our reporting that really took me aback, and she said that it's worse in the eyes of some prosecutors and judges to be a mother that is a drug user or a drug dealer than it is to be a murderer. And that speaks to some of the attitudes that people have towards women and mothers who choose to, that use drugs or that are selling drugs. And sometimes they're doing it, like we saw with Patricia Spotted Crow's case, to sometimes support themselves. And sometimes they're doing it because of a man in their life. And so I think the whole idea of proper womanhood is something that that we bring up in our story. And so, we'll come back to that, but I wanted to start with Sheila here. You're the Community Development Officer for Girl Scouts Beyond Bars. And so when we think about Girl Scouts, we think about selling cookies and we think about fun activities, and certainly you do that in your work with some of the girls that you work with and some of the mothers. So you work with children and their mothers who are incarcerated in the reunification process. So you go to prison with some of these children to visit with their moms, and you plan activities, and the girls do stuff with their moms, and you advocate for the girls. Can you talk about your work and talk about how you do that, how you advocate for the girls and the families, and how that happens when you go take them to prison a couple times a month?
Well, I believe that proximity is the best thing for these children. It is nothing like holding and hugging your mom. And I say to women, when they say, I have to sell drugs to feed my child, I want them to look at the faces that they left behind as a result. So when decisions are being made, it's devastating. I've transported many children, and it's always the same. There's hurt, there's fear, but they're some of the bravest children I know because they get on a van with people they don't really know to travel miles just to see their mom. And I want people to see the children because there are a lot of policies and advocacies for the women, which I totally support. But I want people to see the children and the programs that are needed to help these children. There is a high suicide rate among these children. These are not notes I take or books I read. These are lives I touch. They call myself and my staff with saying, I want to kill myself. Miss Sheila, Miss Shannon, Miss Jackie, Miss Josephine. And it's not one child. There's several conversations like that where they're so fearful and they're so hurt. They don't understand. They lived in that house when the drugs and whatever the criminal activity was going on. They lived that. But then their mom was just taken out of the house. She was the breadwinner. She was the support. She was the advocate for them. She was the one that encouraged them not to be like her, to go to school. And then she's removed from the home. And usually that's not with, they do not have warning of that. A child comes home and mom's gone. That's devastating. That's traumatizing. And they can't talk to anybody about it because there is a stigma. When you say, my mom is incarcerated, it's a stigma. There's secrets in the family. There's, don't tell anybody. Can you imagine how that feels? They feel alone. They feel hurt. There are youth programs for children everywhere, like ours, but our program is specific for children with incarcerated parents. What that means is we believe that you have to transport that child. That's labor intensive. That's vans, that's gas, that's staff overseeing van loads and bus loads of children because we believe it's so important that that child see and touch her mom that they thank you. And it's so important for the mom as well, but I don't think people really realize how impactful that is to that child's life. She or he is going to school, they're trying to get on the basketball team, they're trying to get the prom dress, they're trying to figure out how they're gonna go to college, they're trying to figure out how to color in a coloring book. That's how young we have them. But yet, they are moving from house to house to house, and people are making decisions without ever considering the child. There has not been much money or funding put into programs like ours. And I'm not being specific to my program because I can only do so much, but money needs to be placed in to help these children because it's like, the way I can best describe it to anybody, it's like having cancer and then you send me to a foot doctor, but I have cancer. That's how we do with the children. We're sending them to the Y, we're sending them to community centers when they need to be in programs that specifically help with the trauma that they're going through. Being separated for many reasons. I mean, death, you move, change jobs, divorce, but I am trying to let people understand it is so harmful to a child to be separated because your mom went to prison. And so when we transport them, I just want you to see, if I could just paint a picture, when we step off those buses and we get into that ever space that we take to see those children, to see their parents, if you could see the look on their face, they are so anxious for this woman that's gonna come through this door. And they know when they go with us, they're only gonna get about an hour and a half. But they don't care. They are so anxious to see that mother walk through. And when she comes through that door, they're running and they're hugging and they're crying. And so people have said, well, why would you do that with children? Why would prison be a place for them? But I say to them, if it was your mother and you had any place to see her, you would go see her. Because a mother is the most important individual in a young girl or child's life. She influences. So the positive of that is, when we bring them in, we do have programs that we target that. We address the issues with the mom and the children. We do it through, we do it through Girl Scout activities, resources. We do address anger. We do address trauma. But the biggest number one thing that we address is separation anxiety. Putting those two individuals together changes lives. I have brought some children with me here today, and they came, they know why they are here, and they're not ashamed, because we want them to know you didn't do anything wrong. You didn't have anything to do with the decision that was made. You are truly a victim of your circumstance, and you have a right to receive services. Just like when someone's on drugs and you say, well, they have a right to have mental health, they have a right to have treatment. Well, a child has a right to have services that address what they have gone through with the absence of their parents.
We have one of the Girl Scouts, a former Girl Scouts Beyond Bars, the graduates in the audience. Can I ask her, Paris Kennedy, can you stand up? Can everybody give her a round of applause here?
Thank you all for that. As Ms. Sheila said, I am a former Girl Scout. I am now one of the College Connect members with Girl Scouts, so basically like a mentor to the girls. Thank you. Basically my story is, during my freshman/sophomore year of high school, my mother was incarcerated. She was a single mother to 3 kids, and her leaving was probably one of the worst things that could have happened to me. Eventually, I basically dropped out of school, failed my first semester of my sophomore year in high school, started working full-time to support myself and my siblings and my grandmother, and just really didn't have a purpose and didn't have that person there to say, you have to be better and to keep pushing me. I want to say it was Miss Jackie. She came to my grandmother's house. Me and my siblings were split up, and she came to my grandmother's house, and my grandma was like, hey, come over, so he's gonna come speak to you about coming to see your mom. And I'm like, cool, that's gonna be great. So I go, and she's like, yeah, we're gonna take you every month to go see your mom. And I'm like, okay. And at this point, I was still pretty angry with my mom. I didn't know how to feel about the situation. And it was just really hard to even come to terms with seeing her, and I hadn't seen her in months. I think it was maybe even close to a year that I hadn't seen her at all. The first time I went and seen her, as Ms. Sheila said, it was overwhelming, and it was just this anxious feeling like my mom is really about to come through those, my mom is really about to come through those doors, and seeing her, even once a month, like she said, once a month for an hour and a half changed me completely. I am now a sophomore at the University of Oklahoma. Sophomore at the University of Oklahoma, majoring in health and exercise science, pre-physical therapy. I currently am the reigning Miss Black and Gold Oklahoma. I have a platform. I wanted to give back so much, and I feel so strongly about this issue. I have a platform which is entitled Breaking Out, and it's just an initiative to educate the children about what's going on in their lives and to provide those resources, as well as to raise awareness to the fact that there aren't resources out there. I was just one of the lucky ones to make it out, and to be different than that statistic and that stigma that everybody puts on a child that has an incarcerated parent. So that's pretty much my story. From here on out, I've dedicated a lot of my time to trying to give back and trying to live through my platform. I actually have an event next week, which is a panel event similar to this one, which is just going to be focused on how when a parent is incarcerated, it affects not only the parent or the child, but also the community, and you know what needs to be done to address those situations. But that's my story, and these girls, they probably have their own story, probably battling with their own issues, but this is a very traumatizing experience, and I just feel like everybody else probably that's in this room, that there needs to be awareness to the issue, and from here on out, that's basically what I'm going to do.
Damari, I think that leads really nicely into talking with you about the advocacy work that you're doing. And you're a mom, and you're working on legislation to prevent shackling of pregnant women when they deliver their child. You came into prison, you were 7.5 months pregnant.
Yes, I was indicted when I was 7.5 months pregnant. And so I was able to deliver my baby at home, and I went into prison when he was 6 months old.
Okay.
However, I lived in Texas at the moment. And when I had to turn myself in, I was sent to Tallahassee, Florida. So imagine the hardship of, leaving a 6-month-old baby and going all the way from Texas to Florida and not knowing when I'll be able to see my child again. And then I saw him when he was 9 months old. And so, and I could really, when sitting here and listening to Miss Sheila tell the story about how you're anxious, or how that child is anxious, you're anxious on both sides, because just waiting for a visit from your child, that gives you hope and purpose. But being so far from home, you don't know when to expect it. And so I saw him when he was 9 months old, and I didn't see him again until he was 2 years old. And there was no, so there was no consideration of the fact that I had a child, and my sentence was a mandatory minimum sentence. So therefore, it was a conspiracy charge, and it carried 10 years, 120 months. And there was no consideration of the fact that I was pregnant. It's just like, if I committed a crime, which in a conspiracy, you're held responsible for everybody else's actions also. So it's not that my crime warranted that much time. That was my first time having a felony. And so I was sent that far away from home, and I really didn't know when to expect to see him.
I think, and then you had another, and when you came home, you had missed so much. You had missed like the first steps, you had missed.
There was so many first things. I missed the first two, the first word, he was 6 months old when I left him, and when I got him back in my custody, he was 8 years old. So this is a person that I've got to get to know. It's not my child that I know his little quirks and what he likes and what he dislikes, and we had to get to know each other, and it's a process. It's an ongoing process.
Yeah, I think that's something that a lot of mothers struggle with, that they have a grandparent or somebody else that's raising their child while they're in prison, and they may have a way that they want to discipline or raise their child, but somebody else is doing it for them. I wonder if that's something.
Yes, that's the story of many mothers, because you can't be a mother behind bars. You could tell somebody, well, I want you to do X, Y, and Z, but they're in their household. So you can only be grateful that your child is in a safe place. Yes. And, they may not do everything exactly how you want it, but they're being loved, and they're being fed, and they're being clothed, because some children fall into the cracks, and they're bounced from place to place. So that's a big thing.
Can you talk about the legislation that you're advocating for?
Yes, the legislation that I'm advocating for is to end the shackling of pregnant mothers. So when a mother goes into delivery, it's not necessary for her to be shackled, not a leg, not an arm, nothing is necessary, because we take this risk to bring children into the world. And at any moment, it could be a life or death situation. And so your main concern is just bringing that child into the world. So therefore, I feel like it's dehumanizing to shackle a woman during childbirth, regardless of if it has committed a crime.
Okay, so let's talk with you, Patrice, about you work with Still She Rises. Right. Tell me, this is you're different from other public defenders, when you only defend moms that are incarcerated. Right. Tell me why you came from New York City to North Tulsa. and a little bit about that community and what makes that community unique in Oklahoma, and I think with some of the clientele that you represent.
So Still She Rises came to Oklahoma because of the high incarceration rate of women. We specifically chose North Tulsa because, as you've heard today, Black women and women of color are disproportionately reflected in those statistics. And so that's why we chose North Tulsa. North Tulsa is the historically Black community in Tulsa. It is a very resilient community, a very welcoming community, but it's also a community that has a very sad and scary and terrible history with the race massacre from 1921, and it has suffered from systemic injustice and government deinvestment since that 1921 massacre. And I think what's really important about that is that that history and the silencing of talking about that history really is embedded and entrenched in the culture of not only Tulsa, but in North Tulsa. And so when we look at what's happened in North Tulsa, how there's no grocery store in North Tulsa, but over $15 stores, where there are 23 elementary schools in North Tulsa, with a majority having F ratings. So when we look at sort of what's happening to North Tulsa, you have to look at the history also.
Yeah, I think I'm supposed to be using this microphone now. Sorry. I want to talk about you come and see your clients within the first 48 hours that they're charged, and that's really different from a lot of the women that I spoke with for the story. You know, they would have a public defender that they would meet with maybe a week later. You know, they would, just like with Patricia Spotted Crow, they would find out like, oh, I'm being charged with this. It makes, I think in your experience, it makes a huge difference when you come in right away and you're able to work with the women.
Absolutely.
Can you talk about that?
Absolutely. So right now what we are seeing, and I should preface that we have been on the ground since January, so we are learning a lot, and we don't know everything right now. But what we are seeing is that the arrest to arraignment time right now in Tulsa is about a week, okay? So that's a week of a person sitting in jail without having seen a lawyer, without having seen a judge, and they're held in on bail that is set by a bail schedule, right? And you think about bail, the purpose of bail is to make sure that someone comes back to court, but it's also supposed to be individualized based on that person's circumstances. People are sitting in jail for a week without having anyone challenge bail. So one of the first things that we have done at Still She Rises is that we go to see our clients within actually 24 to 48 hours of arrest. And we are filing motions to get in front of judges almost immediately to talk about bail. All of our clients are indigent. They have little to no income, but are sitting in jail on $25,000, $50,000 bonds. Believe me, it does not take that much money to ensure that my client who has zero income is going to come back to court. So we go up into court and we advocate for bail. We have had tremendous success with that. We've had probably close to 70% of our bond reduction motions granted. And it's tremendous because during that week, all of our clients are mothers. They don't know where their children are sometimes. They don't know who has their children. Their children's routine has been disrupted. The mothers, if they're working, they may have lost their job during that week time, and we can advocate with employers to say, we're working to get them out. We think that we can get them out. And we just are trying to stabilize our mothers after this destabilizing event has happened.
Yeah, and I also want to talk to you about how sometimes, well, parental rights there's a move to immediately terminate parental rights in some cases, and you are challenging that as well.
Right. So Still She Rises does what's called holistic defense. So we don't only focus on the criminal case. We also focus on some of the collateral things that happen with our clients and our mothers in this case. So not only are we in criminal court, we are also in the family courts and juvenile courts and represent mothers to keep their rights from being terminated and really try to get the children and mothers back together. It was very interesting to hear Steve Kunstweiler talk about there needing to be more deprived cases being filed when we know that children need to be with their mothers. But we certainly have plenty of concurrent cases where there's both criminal charges and cases in the child welfare system for the same allegations. And it's pretty scary what is happening right now. It's something that we are not used to seeing in New York City. It wasn't very often that we saw concurrent cases, but we see mothers being charged and also at risk of losing their children. So we currently have clients that are sitting in jail for child neglect for things like they didn't have food or furniture in their house. They're sitting in jail for being poor. We have criminalized poverty. And then instead of supporting these mothers and giving them help, we're sitting them in jail. Sorry, I keep going.
No, you were. I mean, I think that's exactly you. We were going to talk about a case, and there was a case where a woman was. She was
homeless for about a year. Was able to get housing through the housing authority. Happened to have her children. Had been there less than a month, and the police came to the house for a separate altercation. They come in. They don't see furniture. They don't believe there's adequate food. She's arrested, charged with child neglect. And the judge asked me, so what does your client look like? I'm like, Judge, what's more important is what did those children look like? Were those children not being fed? Did they look malnourished? Of course not. They didn't. That child was being fed, but now my client is sitting in jail. She was originally in jail on $100,000. We got it reduced to $50,000. She's now in on $10,000, but she has no money. So she is sitting in jail for being poor.
We have less than 40 seconds left, and I want to give, Demaria, I just want to ask you, as a mom, hearing from children and hearing from, the people up here on stage, as a mom, I'd like to have you have the last word. And what do you think? What do you think? What are some of the takeaways that you've heard from this panel discussion, and what are some recommendations? Like I said earlier to Patricia Spotted Crow, we have a room full of district attorneys and people who are in power, and I want to hear from you on what
I think that it's very important that the leaders of our state recognize that even with drug abuse, that should be more so of a public health concern instead of criminalizing it. And I believe that we as mothers, we need more support groups. I've been in conversation with Still She Rises, and we're in the process of forming support groups. And also, we need more alternatives to prison. Different programs that focus on a holistic approach. And as I sit here as a member of the National Council of Incarcerated and Formerly Incarcerated Women and Girls. So the end of shackling of pregnant women is a nationwide effort. It's not just Oklahoma. Oklahoma isn't the only state. It's just challenging the systems that, all across that just abuse the women. And I think just looking at the fact of women and children more so as individuals and not as numbers. Not a number in the justice system, not a number that makes the prison money. And that's the main thing, is looking at us as individuals, because a nation is judged by how they treat their women.
Thank you, ladies, so much for the work that you're doing and for being here today. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Sheila, Demaria, Patrice, and thank you, Allison. We're going to finish this afternoon by imagining what a more effective justice system might look like. To help us do that, please welcome Susan Sharp. We just heard her quoted in the last session. Susan Sharp is Professor Emerita at the University of Oklahoma.
Hi.
And she is also the author of the book Mean Lives, Mean Laws, Oklahoma's Women Prisoners. Laura Pittman is the Director of Population and Programs. Laura is Director of Population and Programs at the Oklahoma Department of Corrections. Mimi Tarish is the Executive Senior Program Director. We have some very, very popular women up here. Mimi Tarish is the Executive Senior Program Director at Women in Recovery, a diversion program for women in Tulsa County. And Sonia Piles graduated from that program. And here to lead the conversation, please welcome back Reveal's Ziva Brandstetter.
Thank you. Well, we have had a great discussion today, and we want to end this on a positive note and talk about solutions, talk about fixing this problem. And I have just the people here to tell us how to do that. It's very important that this not just be a conversation that we have and then we go back home and forget. There are concrete solutions that have already been suggested by a task force that studied this, by these people that were here today. So I want to talk about that a little bit. Mimi, we don't have to reinvent the wheel. There's a successful program in Tulsa. There's a program in Oklahoma City called Remerge. We have some exciting things, and I want to get more about that. We have some exciting things going on with Women in Recovery, the program in Tulsa, in terms of a pay-for-success model. Mm-hmm. And so I wanted to just talk about, how the program works and what makes it a success in terms of Women in Recovery. What do you think makes this program work so well?
Well, I think it's a combination of things. First of all, thanks to the George Kaiser Family Foundation, we are funded. And if you know anything about the addiction, it is a brain disease. And for women that have struggled with addiction for a very long period of time, there needs to be really long treatment that is also going to address, as everybody has said here today, early childhood trauma. And every one of the women who have been in the program have experienced early childhood trauma. About 70% of those women have experienced trauma around early sexual and physical abuse during early childhood and early adolescence, and it goes untreated. And so to be able to provide intense treatment for a long period of time really creates change in the brain. We are re-architecting that brain. But we also have identified all the barriers that also address women in the criminal justice system. So to be able to provide them the opportunity for health services and dental services, as well as employment skills. 67% of the women who come in are unemployed. They've had inconsistent work histories. So we've been able to really provide GED for the 37% that have not yet had the opportunity for their GED, employment readiness training, employment placement, computer utilization. We have our community college that is embedded there as well. And there's a couple other things that I think make the program pretty unique. One is we are very dual focused. So we know that children's trajectory is going to follow their mother oftentimes. And so children have also experienced a great deal of trauma when their mother was in their addiction. So we get to provide services to the children, and we get to create this opportunity for successful reunification. And then we all know that addiction is a lifetime disease. And we're studying the science, and we know that long-term support is critical. So we have an aftercare program that is available to all of our grads for forever.
Okay. And my understanding of the new Pay for Success model, which is just brand new, is that essentially the program for successful graduates will be able to recoup a percentage or an amount of what the state would have spent to lock up that woman.
Correct. So the Pay for Success, the ink is still pretty wet. The governor signed our contract April 10th. And so for a program that's 16, 17 months in length, we will start seeing some return from the state probably in October of 18. And there will be four subsequent incremental financial contributions, right, as long as the woman doesn't reoffend and end up in the Department of Corrections.
Okay, wonderful. And so, Susan, we were talking about Remerge, which is a program in Oklahoma City, similar to Women in Recovery, has some slight differences. Can you just basically just recap for people what Remerge is and how?
Well, Remerge is another diversionary program. The same concept. It's newer, not as established as Women in Recovery, but so far it's had 80 women graduate. Impacting 210 minor children, wow, as Mimi was pointing out.
And the indirect, that's a lifetime of change for those kids.
It's a lifetime of change for those kids. It's the same concept of providing those wraparound services to help the women A, get sober, and B, develop a lifestyle that's going to help them maintain being clean and sober. And you know, that 5% recidivism rate already saved the state $12 million.
Amazing. So, and for people who want to see like an actual face in this, these are not just numbers. I want Sonia to tell us briefly about your story, and then how women in recovery changed your life.
So I grew up in a very violent and chaotic home. I experienced all types of abuse at a young age: emotional, physical, sexual. I started experimenting with drugs and alcohol at a very young age. It seemed like the perfect way to escape the pain I endured. By age 19, I was completely addicted to methamphetamines, and that's when I had my first encounter with law enforcement. By age 24, I was incarcerated in the Oklahoma Department of Corrections for a drug-related crime, and I served nearly 3 years on that sentence. I wasn't provided with any services while I was in prison. I didn't get any drug treatment. I didn't need to be incarcerated. I needed help. It wasn't long after I was released from prison that my addiction spun out of control once again, and I reoffended, and the cycle continued on and so forth. Before entering the Women in Recovery program, I felt completely hopeless, helpless. I was homeless, living from motel to motel. I was full of fear, anxiety. I felt trapped, consumed by anger and shame. I was beyond tired of the chaos, and I wanted help, but I didn't know how or where to turn and what that looked like. One of my biggest motivations for treatment was seeing my oldest child now in addiction. And I wanted more than anything to break the vicious cycle of addiction in my family. I wanted a better life for my children. I didn't wake up and choose to be an addict. I didn't wake up one day and ask to be sexually abused in all those other ways. But as a result from those traumatic experiences, I became an addict and addicted at a very young age. The services I received there are many. I received hundreds and hundreds of hours of individual and group therapy, clinical services, case management, health, housing. I learned how to be a better and a different parent. I learned every tool and every skill I needed to be successful in life while being a participant in the Women in Recovery program.
So a major, major life change for you.
Absolutely.
And have you sort of reunified with your family? And it separates families, addiction, prison. It gets mad at you. And so have you been able to sort of heal those wounds and gotten the skills that you need to do that?
Yes.
Through Women in Recovery.
So I have been totally reunified with my children and my young grandchild, who I have raised. My oldest child is now a participant in the Women in Recovery program. So she too is having the very same opportunities, the life-changing experiences. Without being a participant in the Women in Recovery program, none of this would have been possible.
Fantastic. Good for you. Laura, I want to go to you because you were in the trenches there, working with these women, hearing their stories on the other side of it. And you've worked at the Department of Corrections how long?
Since 2000.
Okay. And you have heard their stories. How big a factor is the early trauma that women suffer, and how do you think, we talk about we need to start fixing this at the beginning instead of the end. How important is that?
So it's incredibly important. It's everything. And what you've heard about is 2 programs that allow women to work through the trauma, work through the addiction, gain the skills that they need in lieu of coming to prison. Unfortunately, as a state, we tend to incarcerate as opposed to provide the services that really help turn their lives around, the lives of their children around, because it really is multi-generational. And so I'm going to use a little bit of Susan's research about the women who are incarcerated in Oklahoma. And so 2/3 of the women that are incarcerated have a history of physical abuse, sexual abuse, or both. Most 2/3. Most come from childhoods of poverty. Most are born into homes where one or both parents were violent, one or both parents had mental illness that was untreated, had addiction that was untreated, saw domestic violence as a way to solve conflict. About 1/3 of the women had one or both parents incarcerated when they were children. Everything that you can think of is layered one on top of the other. It's not one bad thing one time. It's repeated episodes, repeated events, and I'm sure that Sonia could speak to that better than I can, but it's a story that resounds throughout the women, and it's the common story, not the atypical story. And so what I think is incredible is that you have come this far, and that's what I was always left with the women, is that I'm amazed that they made it to prison to begin with, that they survived to get that far, and that they turned their lives around. And there's a lot of women in the audience today that have done exactly that.
Yeah. I'm going to come back to you a little bit, and I want to talk about what you wish people knew about prison and the work that you're doing there. So think on that. And Susan, I want you to talk about your book, Mean Lives, Mean Laws.
Okay.
And you did a lot of research on this topic. You're a national expert. Tell us, sort of, if you can, sort of the main takeaways that you found in doing the research. What do people need to know about this problem?
They need to know it's not mean women, and that's sort of the play on words that the title is about. It's not that we have a bunch of bad women, that our women are worse in the state of Oklahoma. It's that they have those lives that are very deprived, all the abuse that we've heard described here. That's the mean lives, lives of poverty, lives of abuse. And then we have laws, too, that interact with that. So we have women who start using drugs to cope with their childhood abuse, or in some cases, domestic violence as an adult. And then we have laws that are far more punitive than the states around us, and really than any states. And so that's like a perfect storm in this state. It's the explanation, or part of the explanation, of why we have such a high female incarceration rate in this state. Part of it, too, is that in most states, sentences of 1 year or less, or in some states 2 years or less, are not served in the Department of Corrections. They're served in county jails. Our county jails, because of the way our statutes read, are more holding facilities to get to the Department of Corrections. And I'm not sure that one is worse than the other. County jails have even less funding and less available for treatment. We've heard a lot about how little treatment was available in the Department of Corrections, but they do the best they can with the very limited funding they have. We're just wasting our funding, is my position, and that's kind of the takeaway of the book, that if we focused on childhood and helping women when they first start getting into trouble, instead of slapping a felony on them, let's work with them to help them get their lives back together and keep their family together, and then we're preventing that next generation.
Okay, great. Well, like I said, you all do great work. I read a statistic that about 1/3 of correctional officers at the Department of Corrections qualify for food stamps.
Correct.
Which is a sad statistic. I mean,
Absolutely.
There's a tremendous amount of work that you all have to do with very limited resources. So what do you wish people knew about the work that the Department of Corrections does?
So the Department of Corrections is chronically underfunded. So we're not funded adequately to do the job that we are missioned to do. We have no control, no say-so over who comes in the door. Folks are sentenced to us from all over the state. Around 90% of our budget goes to pay for 4 things. The 4 things it pays for is staff salary and benefits, pays for contracted beds, because we don't have enough state beds to put the people that are sentenced to us.
Yeah, there are about 8,000 inmates in
Correct,
private
in
prison
contracted beds. It pays for medical care for the offenders, and it pays for food for the offenders. So that leaves 10% to address probation and parole offenders' needs, to address programming, to address maintenance needs for facilities, which are really largely neglected. We have over $140 million of urgent facility maintenance needs. So it's simply underfunded, and so we're not able to provide the level of programs that we would like to provide. We have some limited substance abuse treatment, education, criminal thinking, cognitive behavioral kind of programs. We have career tech, and we're working to far improve our reentry planning. All of that takes staffing, all of that takes money to be able to accomplish those objectives. But unfortunately, less than a third typically of people who have an education need, have a substance abuse treatment need, are able to come into the system, get into the program, complete it before they release. We simply don't have enough resources.
Okay. So I'd like to have each one of you talk about just one thing that you think that should be done to tackle this problem. It doesn't have to be anything like a specific policy thing, but one thing, what area you wish the legislature, the governor, that people would focus on, people in power to change this would focus on. And I want to point out that there's a task force that spent a lot of time studying this. They issued 27 recommendations. I tweeted a link to it a little while ago. Some of these recommendations are very specific. Revise the habitual offender statute to focus the most severe punishment on violent offenders. So if you have a prior, it doesn't matter if it's a very minor prior or if it's a very violent prior, it's treated the same. Judges don't have discretion in a lot of cases. The fines and the fees, when people get out of prison, it's just incredible. And that's another recommendation. So talk to me about one thing, and I know that you probably have an opinion on this too. So I want you to talk to me about what you think.
I have a very strong opinion, especially in regard to the fines and the fees. So not only exiting prison now with a felony record, being a convicted felon, now I have these thousands and thousands of dollars of fines and costs. And to this day, and after I've been paying on these for several thousands, we're talking more than $40,000 in fines and costs that have accumulated over the years and since my last.
And so it seems like no matter how hard you work, you can't ever get out of this.
Right, it's hard for me to see the light at the end of the tunnel. At the tunnel when we're talking about that. How am I ever going to pay this? I'll leave this earth still owing.
And one of the recommendations of the task force is realistic repayment schedules, and also not sending people back to jail or prison for not paying. Mimi, what about you?
Each one of those issues is so critical. We did a little study around fines and fees with a TU Law student last year, and collectively, the 100 women that were there that day had over $523,000 of fines and fees that were owed. So we're setting people up for failure. But I do want to say that since we've started this work, we've seen about a 54% decrease in female receptions. And so when I think about really communities making a change for Tulsa County, this is really exciting. And I think we have to remain focused on pulling back the onion, looking at the gaps, keeping people, not the thought leaders, but the change leaders, and really fighting these issues like Tulsa County has. And it requires the PDs to be there, and the district attorney's office to be there, and the judiciary to be there. And as a community, fight these issues together so that one by one we can really continue to see significant change. I don't think you can sit back. I think we have to be relentless. We have to stay on the issues.
Could you expand the model of women in recovery and reemerge on a pay for success model? Couldn't you expand that to other counties? Couldn't you do it statewide?
I think we're very fortunate that we have funding to do the work that we do, but I think that much of what both of our programs provide is very replicatable. And so we are very willing to also share what we've learned, lessons learned, what doesn't work, what does work. But I think it is so fundamentally important to collaborate and to keep, this is a community problem.
Sure. Dr. Pittman, what do you think?
So I agree with both my peers. what you see in Tulsa really is the community coming together and the community deciding that they're not going to be one of the 2 leading counties in terms of sending women to incarceration in Oklahoma. That program, Women in Recovery, really was replicated in Oklahoma County through remerge. Probably the biggest difference really is it has to do with funding streams and has to do with the community engagement and the way that it was approached and the way that it was started. But it certainly can be done in multiple communities. In terms of what do we need to do, Mimi talked about community. This is a community issue. It's not a Department of Corrections issue. It's not just people who are incarcerated or their families issue. It's a community issue. And when we're talking about people who are in need of help in a community, that's how it needs to be addressed, in community. When we're talking about people who are releasing from prison, they're returning to a community.
Yeah.
They're returning to be a citizen.
And I know that the ban the box trend is something that a lot of people think will work.
And we need to rethink how we use our prisons in Oklahoma. Prisons are for people who are a threat to public safety.
Right. Okay.
That's what prisons are for.
And Susan, we'll wrap it up with you, and then I'll take some questions in just a minute. What do you think?
Well,
Maybe one thing, at least.
First, I agree with everything that's been said. Second, you stole my thunder because the Ban the Box movement, across multiple dimensions, across employment, across education. I don't know how many people in this room know, but most of our institutions of higher learning automatically will disqualify, and the person has to appeal for admission if they have a felony conviction, and housing. So those 3 areas are things I think we also need to keep in this discussion and moving forward and what we can change, because to take away someone's opportunity to make a decent living to support themselves and their family for the rest of their life.
After they've paid their debt.
After they've paid their debt.
Yeah.
And we're talking about something that's a public health issue, as the last group stated anyway, with addiction. That's just so unjust.
Yeah, I was looking at some numbers from the task force report about the number of women that are, first-time offenders, no felony record. 80% have no history of violent crimes. 75% of people admitted to prison or sentenced for nonviolent crimes. Over half sentenced to prison have one or no prior felonies. So we have a lot of people going in there that don't meet the...
And Ziva, if I could, based on the projections that were done in advance for the governor's task force, the growth for Oklahoma, we're talking about a 25% growth over the next 10 years.
If we don't do something.
60% of that growth is females.
Right, and they're going to have to spend $1.9 billion and build 3 prisons if something doesn't change.
And Ziva, could I add one thing to that? I think that also, as one of the gentlemen earlier described, we have got to address the children. It is devastating for children. So starting earlier and earlier.
Are linked.
Absolutely.
So we have time. I'm just sorry, we'd like 6 minutes of questions, and be happy to. Okay. Any questions?
Lanny Haybrock with the Institute for Child Advocacy. So one of the staggering statistics that have, I think, a lot of us kind of our minds reeling is that Native American women are incarcerated at 3 times the rate of their peers and Black women at 2 times the rate of their peers. So my question is, have other states or other cities invested in training people who work in Department of Corrections or in the justice system in implicit bias? And have we seen any returns on that?
I mean, this is a disparity in the research I did. These disparities exist, nationwide certainly, but there's a big difference between Oklahoma and some states.
And it's a growing area, and no, it's not permeated our department yet, but things are moving in that direction. Unfortunately, we're not there yet.
So the question was about implicit bias training, and I think it's something that we need to add to our list of solutions because if you don't end up in prison, then you don't have that problem.
And across the criminal justice system. It's not
sentencing.
Right.
It's across the criminal justice system, not just Department of Corrections.
At every step. Any other questions? Yes, ma'am.
Okay, so my name is Rhonda Bear, and I'm with Stand in the Gap Ministry, and I just have a comment about something Mimi said about disease. Addiction is the disease of the brain. And what really frustrates me in our state is in our rural communities, we are giving life sentences to Mabel Bassett for failing drug court. Not rape, to women. Okay, rural communities, these women are poor,
Yes.
they're single moms with children,
We're talking about the failure.
and they are getting life at Mabel Bassett for failing drug court. Not only is that over $1 million for taxpayers, but what an unjust sentence in this state, and we tolerate it.
We found 7 women in our story for Reveal, 7 women who were doing life sentences for drug crimes.
Yes, and those were, a lot of those, the 7 were habitual, they had fallen under the habitual act, but there's more that are coming in that you didn't get that number from Delaware County that are getting life here recently within the last year for failing drug court.
So what,
When it's a disease of the mind, and yet we're gonna punish you for life and punish your children.
Thank you for that comment. That's very.
So can I
Yeah,
speak to it? So Rhonda, thank you for the question. Again, Tulsa County looks so different than the rural communities. And what we've done and what we've been able to implement in Tulsa County, which is really very exciting, is for women that are failing drug court and they need a more intensive opportunity, then they are being assessed for WIR. I wish that could happen in other communities, but I am happy to say that it is a replicatable practice that should happen in other places.
Yeah. Sonia has a comment.
You know, and I would just,
I'll get right
I would like to say, and also to your comment, Rhonda, that the disease, addressing the underlying issues that lead to addiction is where we need to start.
Yes. Right, thank you. Okay, and another question? Ma'am?
My name is Donna Thompson, and I'm from the Fairview Baptist Church Prison Ministry. And I have a couple of courses real quick. One, I was wanting to know, has anybody looked at the fact, and I'll just talk about Oklahoma County right now, of the costs once you go into the Oklahoma County jail? It's like $174 or $178. Somebody research that later, okay? As a person goes into, there is an actual cost. I was concerned about that because, you know, there's a budget set aside, so why is the person being charged for that? And my second question is this: what type of education, training is there being given to the district attorneys as well as the judges in regards to mandatory sentencing? And how much flexibility do they have to sentence a person instead, rather than alternatives to incarceration?
So one quick takeaway, the task force did recommend that judges have more ability to depart from those mandatory minimums. I think, you know, if we're gonna elect people to be judges, right, we have to give them the discretion and allow them to depart. Do any of y'all have a comment on that?
Well, I would just add one thing, just to ping off of that, and that is we have to train and educate everybody in the criminal justice system around trauma-informed practices and gender-responsive practices so that they can make better decisions.
Yeah, and as far as the fees that are charged inmates for the privilege of staying in the jail, that is a problem that a lot of counties have balanced their budgets as the state has cut back or as they've lost other sources of revenue. They've tried to balance their budgets on the backs of inmates, their families, phone calls, commissary, all of those things. So, yeah. Question? Yes? Yes.
Shelley Academy with Workforce Tulsa. So the task force, the Criminal Justice Task Force last year, those 27 recommendations were turned into legislation that sailed through the Senate and hit a wall in the House because the Speaker of the House allowed them to stay in an unfriendly committee. So for lots of reasons, economic development, which I've done for 25 years in Oklahoma, being one of them, I'm wondering how we can, I'm asking the panel, this is my question, how we might make sure that doesn't happen again this year, and I would ask everybody in this room to think about that as well.
So the question is how can, there were 12 proposals for change that basically failed to get out of committee because of particular lawmakers. So how can people help with that process?
I think it's really important to energize the communities to contact their legislators.
Especially rural.
Repeatedly. I've been told by some legislators that after they get the 5th call on the same topic, then they will go look at it and really take into account what's been said. So I think that, you know, in the end, we elect the legislators and they are accountable to us, and I think we need to remember that.
So reach out to your lawmakers, call and email is what I'm hearing.
I'm going to sound like a civics lesson.
Vote.
Well, who makes the laws? Legislators make the laws. Who votes in the legislators? We do. So if you don't like the laws, if you want to change sentencing structure, if you want to change fines, fees, restitution, if you want to change maximums, if you got to
Make your voices heard.
make your voice heard. Absolutely.
I've got to wrap it up. We are out of time. Thank you all so much for coming, and to the Atlantic especially for their work on this.
Thank you so much, Susan, Laura, Mimi, Sonia, and Ziva. Thank you to all our speakers and moderators today. If I can ask the audience to bear with me for 1 minute, I just want to say a couple of things and thank a couple of people. As I said when I opened today, the Atlantic crisscrosses the country and occasionally goes across the ocean and around the world. And what happened today here in Oklahoma City, I would say, was as relevant and resonant as a conversation as we've ever had. It was clearly a conversation that went beyond a broken justice system. It was about childhood trauma, about mental illness and addiction, about criminalizing poverty. I think Governor Fallon said it well. She said, this is not a Democrat issue, it's not a Republican issue, it's an American issue. And the challenge that we face, I think, was beautifully exemplified when the young woman in the audience, Tracy Kennedy, told the story of her mom going to prison when she was a freshman in high school and how shattering that was to an already young, a fragile childhood. And now here she is, a sophomore in college, which is quite wonderful. There were a lot of powerful stories today, and I do want to thank Google once again for making this conversation possible. I also want to forward promote, as you leave, Google has a special virtual reality experience out there. It's about solitary confinement, and as an extra incentive, I don't know if you've seen them, but they've got those beautiful cardboard Google goggles, and if you go and you look, you get to keep your goggles. Thank you to our collaborators at Reveal from the Center for Investigative Reporting. You've been extraordinary, and thank you for your reporting on this issue and for sharing it with us today. At occasions like this, I also want to turn to all of you. You've been an extraordinary audience, and I mean that truly. I know how precious everybody's time is, so we're really grateful that you spent so much of it with us. Those of us who are out-of-towners have heard a lot about the Oklahoma Standard, and you didn't let us down. So on behalf of the entire Atlantic team, we thank you for your kindness and compassion and for making this such a meaningful day. Thank you to the audience. I have one last request of you. I think you probably noticed when you arrived that there were surveys in your seats. You're also going to miraculously, probably even as I'm standing here talking, get an email from me asking for your feedback. I would love you to take just a few minutes to fill that out because, quite honestly, what you say informs all of our future work. So we would greatly appreciate that time. And with that, I want everybody to have a lovely evening, go outside, talk to one another, and enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you all so, so much.